We've all been notified that we are recording this session, so fantastic. So folks are trickling in. We'll just give it another moment or so before we get going. We'll let folks get in to the webinar. Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for a Squeal on Pigs forum. We'll just give it another 30 seconds or so and we'll get going. Should really prepare music for the first minute or so. So we've got a question already in the chat. Hi, Brenda. Yeah, we will. We'll have a recording available. So we are currently recording and we'll post it to our website. Should be up by early next week. So yeah, and I will write that in there for folks that join later. Okay, well, we're going to get going. It's 6:01. We have an absolutely action-packed evening for you this evening. So welcome and thanks for joining us for the Alberta Invasive Species Council Squeal on Pigs Forum. Tonight, you are going to learn everything you ever wanted to know about wild boar at large in Alberta, and you won't be disappointed that you chose to spend your evening with us. The recording, we are recording the session and it will be made available to you. My name is Megan Evans and I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Invasive Species Council. And I have a co-moderator here joining me tonight. I'm very grateful for that. We have Sebastian Dutrasek, who's the co-chair of the Alberta Invasive Species Council. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with the AISC, the Invasive Species Council, we've been around since 2006. We're a nonprofit organization, and we've been working all those years to protect Alberta from the impacts of invasive species like wild boar at large. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about what we do and the types of programs and resources that we have available, check out our website, which is abinvasives.ca, and we'll pop that in the chat for you so you have a direct link. And while you're there, you should sign up for our newsletter. And if you want to stay in touch, we also are on all the major social media platforms. And I might be a little bit biased, but we have some of the best social media posts around, so you won't be disappointed. You should follow us on social media as well. I do want to take a moment just to acknowledge our funders and our partners in this program, because we can't do the work that we do alone. So we did receive funding from the Canadian Agriculture Partnership to bring Squeal on Pigs to Alberta. And we're really grateful to them for that, because we couldn't do it without it. We also have to acknowledge our partners and especially Alberta Pork, who's been just a tremendous supporter of this program, both through financial and in-kind contributions. So we are really, really grateful to Alberta Pork for the work that they've done. They're a huge champion of this issue. The Alberta beef producers have also been a major producer, and we have a number of counties and other organizations throughout Alberta that have been working hard with us to promote this issue. So to follow along, I did post a link to the agenda in the chat, as well as just to the forum program. So if you want to learn more about our speakers or what they're going to be talking about, click on those links and you can follow right along. So we're going to get going here right away. First, we'll start out with our two initial speakers. We'll do a quick bio break, and then we'll come back with our 3 remaining speakers. We're going to hold all the questions till the end. And we'll have a panel discussion with all of our speakers at the very end. So at any time, if you have questions for our speakers, please enter your questions into the Q&A box. That'll help us facilitate the panel and the Q&A session at the very end. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to get going here with our very first speaker. So we are in it for a real treat, folks. Right off the bat, we have Mike Bodenchuk. So he's the state director for the Cooperative Texas Wildlife Services Program. The program serves the agriculture industry in Texas by providing predator and feral hog management, bird damage management, and beaver control. Additionally, the program protects wildlife and other natural resources, provides urban wildlife damage assistance, and protects the public by minimizing wildlife at airports. So Mike is busy. So Mike's professional interests include feral hog management, predation management, and predator ecology. Mike lives near Hondo, Texas with his wife, Debbie. And I've heard Mike speak before. We're in for a real treat. He's incredibly knowledgeable, and we're really grateful that you're here to share your experiences with us, Mike. Over to you.
I appreciate the invitation. As my bio read, I've manage the Texas Wildlife Services program. I used to be a predator biologist, and now I'm introduced as a feral hog expert, and that's not a promotion. In this case, Texas serves as a worst case example for any other state that might be having feral pigs or feral hogs show up. In Texas, we call them feral swine to be correct, but I'll bounce back and forth between feral swine and wild pigs and feral hogs. What I don't want anyone to think about is Babe the talking pig. When we're talking about feral pigs, they are wild pigs out there on the landscape. Of course, Texas is about as far from Canada as you can get. We're the state at the bottom. But if you're a Texan, this is what the rest of the country looks like. So it's a big state. We have a lot of land and a lot of opportunities to have feral hogs. Feral swine are free-roaming domestic swine. That is, they can be heritage breeds, they can be released domestic pigs, they can be released European wild boar, but in Texas, the majority of our pigs are hybrids between domestic swine and European wild boar. Feral pigs first came to North America with Christopher Columbus. On his second trip, he brought 8 animals to the island of Cuba. What is interesting about this to me is that the first control projects were held in Cuba, what's that, 14 years later? In 1506, they found that the feral swine, or the wild pigs that were there, free-roaming pigs, were interfering with cattle grazing. And so control of pigs has been done in North America or in the Caribbean since 1506. In Texas, we got them in 1542. The DeSoto expedition that landed in Florida and made a big circle in the southeast, what is now the southeastern U.S., arrived in Texas without DeSoto, but with pigs. They started with 300 domestic pigs, and they loose herded them across the southeast, and they lost pigs every place they went. Some 50 years later, Zaldivar actually was buying lard from the Indians when he landed on the coast. So feral pigs have been established in Texas since the 1500s. Starting in 1886, European wild boar were released in North America, in New Hampshire first. These 4 introductions were known to be introduced from European wild stock. So back then, there weren't a lot of checks and balances on importation, and animals were brought, and the original animals were released into the US. New York, New Hampshire, North Carolina, and in Texas. From those and from zoo stock, additional European wild boar releases occurred across the US all the way up into the 1980s, excuse me. So these pure European wild boars were being stocked for shooting purposes, for sporting purposes. It's important to know that European wild boar have got smaller litters. They're more seasonal breeders than the hybrids. But what we've got with the hybrids is the perfect storm. It's got the high fecundity of domestic swine with the resilience and the fitness of the European wild pig. You know about what they look like? They look like pigs. They're about 3 feet tall, males larger than females. At adult weight, it's 100 to up to 500 pounds. And in Texas, we have every color combination of pig that you can look for. We have belted pigs that are mostly domestic swine. We have solid blacks, we have browns, grays. Other populations tend towards the blacks, and I think that's because of survivability. In Hawaii, almost all the pigs are solid black because of the survivability in that tropical sunlight down there. The biology of them is fascinating. Again, these are hybrids between domestics and European wild boar. What's the gestation period for a pig? In agricultural classes, they tell you it's 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, about 115 days. We see wild pigs in Texas breeding at about 7 months of age. So they have their first litter before their first birthday. In the wild in Texas, we see 3 litters every 2 calendar years, about a 7-month interval between litters. And so the pig is pregnant for almost 4 months. She nurses them for almost 3 months because and she's pregnant during that time. There are 4 to 14 piglets per litter. Usually you won't see more than 10 or 12 piglets. Litters larger than that, the piglets don't always survive, but they seem to breed year round. The young in Texas can be born anytime. One of the Texas jokes about feral hogs is our average litter size is a little over 6.2, 6.3, but about 10 of them survive. It seems like the pigs are very, very good at taking care of their juveniles, and we don't see a lot of mortality in that juvenile class. This is a model population growth that I did from literally starting on day 1 with 1 pregnant sow. For 24 months, and I hope you can see my cursor here, for 24 months, this growth curve is very, very slow. But right in here, when the second litters and the third litters start having theirs, it erupts and we get this exponential growth curve. If no pigs die as a result of natural mortality, you're over 1,400. I think it's 1,433 pigs at 33 months in this. Now, fortunately, some die from diseases. A lot die from accidents. They get hit by cars, whatever goes on. But this is the population potential in a population of pigs that has a litter every 7 months, that breeds at 7 months and has their litter before their first birthday. We'll come back to this graph in just a little bit. In Texas, our reality is that these things can grow at a tremendous rate. Between 2006 and 2010, we looked at 3 different indices of the statewide population. Our agency take, private helicopter removal, the meat market purchasing, and all 3 indices indicated our population was growing at 21% per year. In a 5-year period, that's 5 years, if you count 2006 through 10 inclusive, the population doubled. Our population is now estimated at about 3 million feral pigs. We only have about 4.5 million white-tailed deer in Texas. So this is a tremendous amount of biomass out there on the landscape. They're eating invertebrates, they're eating reptiles, they're eating crops, they're eating everything, and about 3 million of them on the landscape. The amount of damage that they do is also incredible. We see about $90 million annually just to 6 main row crops. That doesn't include pastures, that doesn't include improved grazing lands or rangeland. That's just 6 row crops. Livestock damage comes in at about 25 million. That includes diseases that we have to vaccinate for or losses to those diseases. Feral hogs are a predator on newborn lambs and kid goats out there that are range born. And we have about 1 million goats in Texas. So where you've got feral hogs and pasture birthing for goats, they can be a significant predator. We see pasture damage. We've got a lot of natural resource damage, E. coli contamination in streams. We have, again, herps, the reptiles that are out there on the landscape are being eaten by these things. 66% of Texas landowners reported that they had feral swine on their property, and 49% of landowners in Texas reported crop damage. When you add in the costs of control, when you add in damage to property, we're looking at over $500 million a year in damage from 3 million pigs in Texas. We've got a number of diseases of concern. Brucella suis is the type of brucellosis that impacts feral pigs. Brucella abortus is the type that gets into livestock like cattle. It gets into bison. We see it in elk in some of our areas in the US. We've got Brucella at 9.8 to 13% when you look at the antibodies to that bacteria. The problem we've got is that the antibody test was built for B. abortus, not B. suis. And in fact, our last case of B. abortus in cattle, we went down there and sampled some pigs around that. And we found that the pigs had Brucella abortus. We've also found cattle infected with Brucella suis, and dairy cattle are passing the bacteria on in their milk. So B. suis is not just something that the cattle are exposed to, they're passing it through them. When you look at some of the tests that we've done, we had pigs that were antibody positive that were culture negative, and we've had pigs that are culture positive that are antibody negative. We think that we might have in some populations as high as 26% brucellosis infection. Lepto is pretty prevalent in pigs. Pigs have to have water, especially down here where it's hot. They water every day. They're urinating in the water. They're spreading that lepto. They're picking it up from other pigs. You see there 48.9% lepto positive. Influenza viruses affect pigs, and feral hogs have got the same susceptibility to influenza viruses that people do. In fact, we see about 14% of our pigs have antibody to H1 or H3 influenza viruses. From my perspective, the scariest part of feral pigs at the densities that we have them in Texas is that they serve as a mixing vessel for influenza viruses. That is, they can pick up an H1 and an H3 at the same time, and what comes out of that pig may be something that's pathogenic to people. We have toxoplasmosis in pigs. We have a number of pigs that are shedding salmonella bacteria at the time we remove them. That's the actual shedding. That's not antibodies to it. And of course, if they're shedding that in somebody's fresh vegetable crop, the opportunity to pass on that salmonella is very, very high. Cryptosporidium is present in pigs. Giardia is present in pigs. These things are a reservoir and in some cases an environmental multiplier for a number of diseases that we are concerned about. We see significant property damage from pigs. It is very, very rare that in my 40-mile commute to my office in San Antonio, which is the 7th largest city in the US, that I don't see a dead pig hit by a car on the road. You may not know this, but feral swine's eyes do not reflect light like a deer does. So a black pig on a black road at night looks like a shadow until it's too late. We have had a number of people killed by striking feral pigs. Many of them are motorcycle riders who don't see the pig in time and hit it and then lose control of their bike. But 2 years ago, a woman hit a feral hog and it knocked her into the next lane where she was hit head on by another car going the other way. People die in accidents from feral hogs. We have fencing damage. We have a lot of agricultural machinery damage. When you're cutting crops, if there's rooting there and you drop a machine tire into that, then your blades get into the dirt or you have problems keeping your machinery at the same level. I personally don't play golf. And so pigs destroying golf courses has never affected me, but oh my goodness, the people who do play golf really, really get upset about golf course damage. We see that a lot in Texas when we have a very dry year and they're irrigating those golf courses. That's the only green for miles around, and pigs will come into that area in order to take advantage of that moisture and the good soil for rooting. We do a tremendous amount of control in Texas. Last year, my agency removed 51,000 pigs from Texas, which is an incredible number of pigs, but you can guess out of 3 million, we did not control the population. Our objective at this point is to control the damage that they do. And in fact, for every dollar we spend on feral pig control, we're saving $7 worth of resources. I would suggest that for Alberta or the Canadian provinces that are just getting feral swine, the long-term strategy would be to go towards eradication. I think that horse has left the barn for Texas. We talk about fencing as a non-lethal method of controlling pig damage. And I'll tell you that we believe that any fence that'll hold water will hold a feral hog. Feral hogs can push through fences. I watched them from the helicopter run through perfectly good fences and just bend the wire out of shape. They are very, very destructive to fencing, but a little bit of electricity in a crop area where they also have access to other food may be able to reduce the damage. We use corral style traps. There's a picture of a corral style trap on this screen with a guillotine type door. And those are effective at removing whole sounders of pigs. You don't want to trap 2 out of a group of 8 and the other 6 become trap shy. So we try to use all kinds of smart technology, cell activated cameras and gates in order to target the entire sounder. In Texas, where they're going under fences or where they're rubbing on trees after wallowing, you can target individual pigs with snares, and it's effective on individual pigs. You can't catch a whole sounder in snares. You'll catch a boar here or a boar there, but snares are a good way of stopping damage. We use both day and night shooting. We use aerial shooting from helicopters. My agency has 5 helicopters. We have 4 pilots. It takes about that ratio just to keep helicopters up in the air. Very expensive, but with the densities we're talking about, we can remove up to 80 pigs per hour of aerial shooting time. And that actually becomes very, very cost effective. Dogs are very important at the very low end of control. All of the successful pilot projects or eradication projects on islands use dogs at the very end to detect and remove the last 1 or 2 or 3 feral hogs. And so while you're considering strategies, don't exclude dogs. It's very, very slow. It's very, very intensive, but they have been very useful for eradication. Right now, there is 1 toxicant registered in the US for feral swine. It is a warfarin-based product called Kaput. We are trialing that in Texas to see its utility here. Our legislature directed that effort. There's another that we're working with Australians. Australia and I believe New Zealand have both registered sodium nitrite for use. Toxicants have a role perhaps in a fragmented landscape. We've got open areas and 10,000 hectare ranches. We can use aircraft and remove pigs pretty effectively. When we get into closed timber areas, when we get into 100-acre properties or 50-hectare properties, something like toxicants may be more effective than our traditional tools because you can chum the pigs into your area rather than try and scatter them with the regular tools. Fertility management right now is of interest. We're interested in doing it. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered. Do you have compensatory survival for those pigs that are born? Do you have compensatory survivability of the adults if they're not putting in energy into fertility? There's a product registered in Texas for fertility management. You have to feed a boar 5 times every 30 days in order to have him contracepted. If I can feed a boar 5 times in 30 days, I'm going to feed him into a trap. So right now our options for fertility management are limited, but that is a current research topic. Let me come back to this model population growth again, and let me see if you can see my cursor. Let's say we're at this point 1,433 pigs, and Mike comes in one day and knocks that population in half. He takes 715 pigs and puts the population back at half, about right there. How much time did that buy us? When you're talking about control and this exponential growth rate, how much time did you get from 700 to 1400? That's about month number 29 on there. It's month number 33 at the end. You got about 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days, didn't you? The number of pigs on the landscape will double in that period of time when you're in the exponential growth curve. Our strategy is to try and put them back here, under 200 pigs. If you've got 200 pigs and you can kill 50 sows a year, you can keep them under 200 forever. As I said, eradication is not an option for Texas, but when we go into an area, we try and put them in the flat spot on the growth curve and rely on our landowners to try and keep them under control while we go somewhere else on the landscape. Let me talk about the role of hunting in feral pigs management, wild hog management. And I got to introduce myself and my family first. This is actually a picture of my daughter. I was an outfitter for hunters for 12 years before I went to work for the government. My wife currently is a wildlife artist and a taxidermist. She makes money off of mounting things for people. And my firstborn child is named Hunter. So let me make sure you understand, recreational hunting is never limited an established wild pig population anywhere in the world. German hunters can remove over 700,000 pigs and still have an expanding population. So as much as it hurts me to say that, hunting is not a tool for pig control. In fact, it works the opposite. It creates a demand for feral hog hunting. People will move pigs around the landscape to support that demand. You create a culture of hunting feral pigs. We see that feral pigs are very, very detrimental to the hunting of other things. Wild turkey nests and quail nests are destroyed by feral pigs, and they're additive to all the other predators that are nest predators. Pigs and deer compete for the same feed, and frankly, the deer don't like being around the pigs. So deer hunters, turkey hunters, quail hunters should support feral hog control rather than be part of that hunting culture. We've seen in very, very well documented cases in Tennessee where they liberalized the hunting rules and instantly got more populations established. People began moving them for hunting. So we end up with the counterintuitive thought that we're going to not allow hunting, we're going to discourage hunting in order to prevent the establishment of new populations. Control is not hunting. We're doing it with guns, but it's not recreational hunting. And this last thing, you can't barbecue your way out of this problem. It takes intensive control. It takes coordinated control. You have to start in one area and move across to other areas. You have to identify the pockets of feral pigs when you're in this newly established population and work on them systematically. You can't get out of this accidentally. So we use surveillance tools to identify where the pigs are. We've got aerial surveillance. We look for damage from the air. Where you've got snow, you can look for tracks from the air. We use game cameras on the ground to take pictures of pigs. We look for pig sign on the ground. Our pigs have to go to water. So where water is limited, you could go there and look for tracks. You can't, however, come up with a population estimate from the tracks or the evidence that you see. All of those methods are biased in terms of creating a population estimate because of behavioral changes. Somebody shoots at them, they all run to the next place, and you think you're out of them until they come back 6 months later. We do a lot of research in Texas. We've got border disease surveillance. We've got radio studies on there to see how many pigs are going across the border into Mexico, coming back. We use Judas pigs. Our pigs will come in contact with naturally occurring anthrax, and they don't die from it. We have that anthrax on the landscape, but in fact, they may be exacerbating the problems. They root around in the dirt and stir up the spores from anthrax. They urinate in the water sources, which may spread that anthrax to livestock that water there. And certainly they can multiply it by moving it around the landscape. If they're infected then and move 4 miles away and urinate over there, then they're spreading the spores. We've got an ongoing study about euthanizing them in traps using firearms. What's the most effective firearm? What's the most effective shot placement in order to be safe? We've done toxicant research. We've done research on shot shells. We do a ton of research in order to support the control that we're forced to do. And then we've got some new research ideas about using bait tubes and barrels with cameras in order to try and get an index of population, using unmanned air systems to detect pigs and to detect crop damage. We've actually been using drones or UASs and thermal images to fly at first light, detect the pigs before the helicopter goes up. It makes it much, much more effective. If we're not searching in a 360-degree radius, we only have to search in a 10-degree angle from where we launch the aircraft. And then all the modifications that we need for the tools. You put a tool in the hands of a trapper and he's going to be much more effective. And I think that's all I have. We're going to hold questions till later on, but I appreciate it. I hope that gives you a picture of what might be the worst case for you guys if in fact you allow pigs to become established.
Wonderful. Wow, Mike, thank you so much for that overview. That was absolutely some really good information for us to learn about here for sure. So we really appreciate that. So just as a reminder, folks, if you can locate the Q&A box, if you just move your cursor, you'll see a little Q&A bubble. Pop your questions in there. That way we won't miss them and we will address them with all the speakers at the end. So we're going to keep moving. We've got another great speaker here. If you are tuned into the wild boar at large issue in Canada at all, then our next speaker probably needs no introduction at all. We have Dr. Ryan Brook, who is an associate professor at the University of Saskatchewan at the College of Agriculture and Bioresources. His group, the Wildlife Ecology and Community Engagement Lab, works on applied wildlife issues in rural, urban, and northern areas of Canada. And Ryan and his team have been doing research on invasive wild pigs for 12 years and counting. And we're really grateful for that research because he's the main Canadian researcher working on this topic. So Ryan, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, Megan. Appreciate the introduction and appreciate the invite to talk today. Thanks so much for everybody for tuning in. She said 12 years, it feels like more. When I started this, I had a long, beautiful head of brown hair, and now I have a small head of gray hair, but I won't blame that entirely on wild pigs, but it certainly has dominated a lot of my thinking and been a big part of our research for over 12 years now. So yeah. So I really hope that Mike will always go first before me because he set such a great background for these pigs and a lot of things that he was saying. I'm like, yep, exactly what we're seeing here in Canada. So I'm going to go through and talk about some of our research on tracking the spread of wild pigs in Alberta specifically, with a bit of a couple of views of sort of the Canada view, which is of course important because as Mike clearly talked about, these things do not respect any political or arbitrary boundaries, and they really do have quite tremendous movement paths. So here we go. First of all, I want to recognize this has been a huge group effort, especially my PhD student, Ruth Asham, just booked her defense. And so if you want to see a massive deep dive into 6 years of a lot of the original work that was around mapping pigs, I mean, Ruth literally and figuratively put wild pigs on the map in Canada. And before her work and before her mapping work, we knew almost nothing about where they were. And she's just done a whole bunch of analysis that's really exciting. So pardon me, that thesis will be defended in June. So we'll have more papers from that as well. Corey Kramer did his master's with me. He just started a PhD in San Diego, so he's moved on. But a lot of local folks, especially the Moose Mountain team, have been absolutely invaluable to our research, and we never would have got off the ground without them. Mike talked about all these different colors and exactly what we see here in Canada. We see lots and lots of hybrids. There's almost unheard of to have a true wild boar. So we don't call them wild boar in our program. We use wild pigs. which I think is important to capture that there are more things going on just than wild boar. So these things have been purposely hybridized inside the fence on farms with a whole range of domestic pig types. We also have some pink free-ranging pigs running around the landscape. Not many, but some. And so we've seen them harvested. We've seen them on trail cameras. And these are pure Yorkshire and other type of pigs that have no wild boar genetics of any kind. And in the bottom left, we also have this thing that's very much on my radar, potbelly pigs. So these are all Suscrofa, the same species. They can all interbreed, and certainly pigs are very much love the one you're with species, and they will readily breed with any and all different types. The biggest one we've handled in our research program was 638 pounds. And so these hybrids bring this, what many know of as hybrid vigor. So you get all the advantages that have been bred into domestic pigs, like for example, domestic pig actually has an extra set of ribs. And these Duroc landrace big animals, like when we had hogs on the farm, our sows were 800 pounds plus. And so they've been bred to be huge reproductive machines. And so that hybridization means bigger young, more frequent litters, and just lots and lots of success. And so sometimes we call them super pigs because unfortunately that breeding has, and that does definitely occur in the wild as well. We know that they crossbreed, and we know that that confers a lot of advantages. So where are they globally? This black area in Europe and Asia and North Africa is their native range, and so they've been there for millennia. They've been introduced quite broadly, and you could see some areas where there's hash where we're not that certain. Certainly lots in the US, and this is already quite a bit out of date, but shows definitely a distribution broadly on the prairie. So they have been very, very successful in North America. And there's a sort of odd distribution because the US and Canada, if you think of them as sort of experiments, there's some obviously huge similarities in the pigs, but the timeline is fundamentally different. Whereas the US is hundreds of years, and we're talking about 40 years or so at most. So it's been relatively short time period here in Canada. And certainly we can't talk about pigs without at least talking a little bit about African swine fever. And I will say that the first 9 years of studying wild pigs was pretty darn lonely here in Canada. There was not a whole lot of interest and not a lot going on. And so outside of our research, there wasn't too much activity to control them, and not really anything else in terms of research. But one of the factors that has changed dramatically, and I would say the last 2 and 3 years, I've seen just a tremendous shift in interest and focus on what do we do about these things, and certainly a tremendous amount of discussion now, which is great about them. And that a lot of that is honestly driven by African swine fever. This is a disease, of course, that only impacts pigs, but would be catastrophic to Canadian swine industry. So there is justifiably lots of concern, and I'm sure Charlotte and others will touch on this as well. But wild pigs can play a really important role here. And you can see in Denmark, they literally built a fence across their entire country, trying to keep their what they are domestic, or pardon me, native wild boar out, because they can be a major vector. So they can get infected with African swine fever and spread them to domestic pigs. So that is a tremendous real concern in Canada, especially given what we have now for an established wild pig population. So definitely that's been a driver of concern, but all of the other things that were mentioned around crop damage and environmental damage and others we'll get to as well. So this really started in the 1980s. There was a big push to diversify agriculture across Canada. And growing up on the prairies, I remember it well, even as a youth, huge push to move into other things, and emu farms and elk ranches. And of course, wild boar were brought over from Europe to be raised on farms, primarily for meat production. A few provinces have penned what we might call a high fence shoot operation, or a canned hunt or pan hunt, where you pay money to shoot an animal inside a compound. Alberta has them, Saskatchewan, Quebec, a few of those, but Manitoba actually banned them quite some time ago. But so these were brought over to be raised on farm, and that started off as a really good notion that it would be local and fill some of the big fancy restaurants would be serving these, but also the hope was to have a big export market as well. And so this map shows from the agriculture census data, we were able to map out where all the farms were across Canada. And you can see Northern Alberta, Northern Saskatchewan were the highest densities of farms. And at its peak in 2001, we documented 500 farms and 32,000 animals on those farms. And so it was fairly large, but this never had the infrastructure and never had the sort of the momentum, I guess we could say, to get into these big markets. It just wasn't enough. They wanted much, much more. And so following 2001, the market really collapsed on these farms. There are still farms out there. I do hear people saying, several provinces saying they don't have them. Rest assured, we can tell you from our research and documentation that all of the provinces at least dabbled in wild boar farms, and most still have some, including, of course, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So that's sort of the history of this. And so when I started looking around, you know, when I started at U of S in 2010 and looking around, well, what's a career worth of research might look like? These wild pigs were just barely on the radar, and some people were doing some things, and there have been some efforts around, you know, historically of trying to trap them and some different efforts to go out and shoot them and that. So there have been sporadic efforts to deal with it, but certainly, as I say, those are pretty limited spatially and not really nothing long-term anywhere in Canada. But as I think we'll see today and hear from others about the programs that are going on now. So the last couple of years have been a huge shift in all sorts of ways, and definitely for the better. So we use the term sounder a lot, and that's a group of typically a lead female with multiple generations of female offspring, and almost always piglets at heel. If you see a group of pigs, and if you don't see baby piglets of some size, you know, not necessarily teeny tiny ones, but if you see them with those horizontal cream-colored stripes, see those young ones, that's pretty typical. And if you're not, you're probably missing them. And that's one of many reasons why sport hunting is not working, is that people will say, yeah, we saw 4 pigs and we shot them. And that's great, but how many were there in the first place? This photo, by the way, is one of the I think the largest sounder I've ever seen. And if you do the math and estimate, this group of pigs weighs about the same as an F-150 pickup truck. So, you know, one of the questions we often get is, well, what are predators? You know, they're going to limit this, wolves and bears. But honestly, you know, with groups this size, they can be extremely aggressive. And look at that animal in the front there with those nice sharp tusks. They have razor sharp tusks, and I can speak to their ability to cut through lots of things, including clothing. And so they can be really aggressive. And so the notion of predation sort of fixing this problem for us is pretty questionable. They may have some role. And as they move into the boreal forest, where we do have more established populations of predators, we might, but certainly currently the overwhelming majority of the pigs that we're seeing in Canada are on the prairies, where we've largely removed anything bigger than a coyote. So I'm only aware of all of our work we've done over all these years. I'm only aware of one case of one pig being killed by a wolf. Mike already said reproductive rates, we have about the same, we're probably just under 6 young per litter, as opposed to more like 6.2 that he said, but effectively very similar. Continuous reproduction throughout the year. So a lot of people assumed that they were going to be seasonal and we'd see them born in the summer and then they would sort of try and survive the winter. But in fact, as it turns out, with all the agricultural food, and snow is so critical to our pigs, and that's one of the things that really noticed listening to Mike talk, is that they're in an environment where they don't have snow. And snow, what these animals do, tunnel under the snow and live under it to avoid, of course, those cold temperatures. A lot of models have said, especially in the continental US, have said that we know that pigs don't survive in the cold. And obviously that, you know, the Texas, the California, the Florida, where it's warm, that's where pigs are thriving. And so our work here in Canada has kind of thrown that into a wrench, because where we're seeing the overwhelming majority of pigs in Canada is actually in the provinces with the coldest, most extreme winters, and so they're thriving despite that. And we're not seeing pigs on the coasts, for example, or in any of those warmer areas. So they do thrive under very extreme cold temperatures and heavy snowfall. Oh, there we go. What have we done in terms of research? We've been collecting a lot of data, and this was Ruth's life for quite a number of years in terms of tracking down data. And we've relied on a lot on public reports, expert interviews. We've been doing GPS collaring in Manitoba and Saskatchewan only so far. So those are the only provinces where we have good long-term tracking data. We've used trail cameras, and so we've been collecting locations from 1995 to 2022 and counting. I just did a quick look before today, and I looked. It said over the last 5 years, we've received on average 4.4 new wild pig occurrences every single day over the last 5 years. So we've been very successful in getting people reporting those pig sightings to us, and so that's been a cornerstone of our research program. Since we really started working. So we started collecting in 2010. So anything pre-2010 is sort of from recollection or from old photos and cameras and that sort of thing. But yeah, I've been remarkably successful. When Ruth started, she was doing a master's, and I said, geez, I don't know if there's enough pig occurrences to do the math to actually do some modeling and look at habitat selection and that. But of course, the more we looked, the more we found, and the public has been incredibly good at sharing information with us as well. So my database right now is just over 60,000 unique occurrences of wild pigs across Canada. Well over half of that has been in the last 5 years. So if you remember the exponential curve that Mike showed, it is virtually identical to the occurrence of wild pig occurrences across Canada, and so we had that flat spot starting in the 90s up until about 2010, and then we started to see some really substantive growth. Now, is some of this because we have a lot more, this trail cameras have become much more common, and so we've looked at different types of data sets, but what's interesting, of course, is no matter what data set you use, whether it's trail cameras or recollection or others, they show the exact same curve. And so we're seeing this exponential growth exactly like you would expect. And I think Mike has made the case already, but one thing I want to emphasize is this is, while it is a bit shocking, this is exactly what we expect. And this is why I love following Mike, his talk, because it sets it up to explain this really well, that we shouldn't be surprised by this. This is pigs doing exactly what pigs do everywhere they end up. 99.4% of all of these occurrences are on the Canadian prairies in Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So while BC is worried and Ontario is doing a lot of things, and Quebec has some issues, and there have been a couple of sightings even in Atlantic Canada, and 2 escapes in near Whitehorse and in the Yukon. And so there are things that we need to worry about in other provinces. This is right now very, very much a prairie province issue. 8% of our total database is in Alberta. So if you sort of rank provinces by pig occurrences, Saskatchewan is by far the most with over half, so 56%, then Manitoba and 8% in Alberta. So that is good news for Alberta, and that the problem isn't nearly as bad as it has been elsewhere. How do you spot them? This is a real challenge because they do spend a lot of time under soil and vegetation and buried in the snow. And so we often don't see them. We see trail camera photos, we see tracks, and you can see that when they drag their belly in the ground because they're much lower than a deer or elk or moose. We'll see the damage that they do and the rooting, but we'll also see these nests. And there is actually a GPS collared female in there with a bunch of young down in there. And of course, we can't see them. So standard tools like flying aerial surveys just don't really work for pigs. You would only see at best a small fraction. Here's Ruth's original paper. This one is actually pretty amazing. This thing has been downloaded over 66,000 times and counting since it was published in 2019. So it's been really, really important. And so when I say she's literally and figuratively put pigs on the map, I'm not even kidding. This is, and this was the early work from 1990 to 2000. This is known. And the way we've done it is we've looked at watersheds get mapped at different levels. And so level 9 watersheds represent sort of a medium-sized watershed, if you will. And they make sense because they're pretty closely tied to from our coloring work, we know the home range size of these. And these are conservatively correspond pretty well to the size of a home range of a pig. And they turn red if you have pig occurrences. And so right now we're just talking about occurrence. And so if one might have 10 and one might have 30, but they still all just turn red as being positive. But we know that there were some back in the 90s. And then in 2001 to 2010, we saw a significant expansion on the prairies, especially in Saskatchewan, but a couple of hot spots, especially that area west of Edmonton, as what was and is the hot spot for Alberta, a few in BC. And then, by the time that we published this paper based on up to 2017 data, we're seeing very, very widespread across Saskatchewan. Ontario started looking pretty hard after this and found quite a few more of those potbellies than wild boar, but we're certainly seeing a lot of occurrences here. Updating this to 2022, seeing lots of watersheds across, and particularly worth noting the transboundary nature of this. And this really is one of the points I'm going to emphasize at the end, is this idea that no one province at least no one prairie provinces has a chance of succeeding without getting, all of the prairie provinces working together. And I've really been an advocate of, I think that there could and should be a working group of the prairie provinces that are really focused on, because no one province, as I say, has a chance until everybody is sort of getting this under control. And with Saskatchewan right in the middle and having the most, that puts significant pressure on Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Now, that's just occurrences. So one of the things we've recognized that is, what does that mean? Is that one animal that ripped through your backyard and kept going, 20 more kilometers and never seen again? Or is this established? And one of the criteria that we often say is that when we're doing this kind of work, there's many different ways. And I've seen already quite a few, and I'll show you a number of different kinds of maps of how we portray the data. But occurrences is important, but a fair question is, what does that mean? And a lot of definitions of what we call an established population is where you actually have evidence of reproduction, mostly through trail cameras. And so here are the prairie provinces showing the red areas, all of those watersheds combined and just smoothed over to sort of join to see where overall the occurrences have been. But blue where we've actually got confirmed reproduction. And some of those areas where we don't have, just means we haven't had cameras. And so it doesn't necessarily mean they're not reproducing, but that's the data we have so far. We don't have a broad network of trail cameras across this area yet. So some gaps there for sure. In terms of agriculture, we know that these were raised on farms and released from farms. And of all the predictors of where free-ranging wild pigs are on the landscape, the single best predictor is where are the current farms and those past farms. That is by far our best way of predicting where pigs will be. And you can see some major, what I call strongholds of pigs, where we've got this sort of north and west of Edmonton here in Alberta, which is the major stronghold in Alberta. We've got one at the Battlefords in Saskatchewan, and then by far the biggest one in Canada is in this Melfort, Tisdale, St. Brew area in east central Saskatchewan. And certainly in this area, there are more wild pigs in this area of Saskatchewan than the rest of Canada combined. It is a massive hotspot and has been since we started putting trail cameras up in 2010. Manitoba has one major hotspot near Brandon, and so that's Spruce Woods Park and the area around that, and 94% of all of the occurrences in Manitoba are in this. So we have this really interesting management issue where we've got two, I think in some way we could call it a two-pig problem, where we've got these major hotspots that are where lots and lots of reproduction and animals are clearly spreading and dispersing away from, but also that we have these sporadic areas where they're showing up all over the Canadian prairies. And I think that's an important consideration. And I think that my view would be that we really need to take a serious zoning look at these areas and think about what that means in terms of, one of these one-off places where there've been one or two occurrences. compared to, because if all you do is focus on these major hotspots, that's important and you'll reduce those densities, but then you've got all these other animals breeding all over the landscape. So it is a significant, we're at a significant area of concern. Corey Kramer just did his master's, did a really nice job of making a landscape connectivity model for pigs using our collar data and using habitat, predicting where the hotspots are, where pigs are more likely to move. And so the reddish areas and the yellow, or especially the redder areas, are where they have really high connectivity and high movements of pigs. And so you can see the transboundary notion of Alberta and Saskatchewan, but one of the major concerns that we have, and we've heard loud and clear from the US, is concerns of Canadian pigs moving down into the US states, which Montana is essentially, or it claims to be, and I believe it to be true, that Montana is wild pig free. But North Dakota, South Dakota have some concerns, but certainly Canadian pigs are not going to help the issue. And we expect that those, especially if you're thinking about managing a transboundary disease like African swine fever or others. So some real concerns there at the big picture. Just made this today to show the recent update of all of our points for all of Canada. These points of occurrence occupy more than 1 million square kilometers. That's bigger than most countries on the planet. There's only probably about 24 countries that are bigger on this earth that are larger than the area that we have occurrences for wild pigs. Are we concerned about all of these? Probably minimally. Atlantic Canada is at a couple that have shown up. One of the challenges with our work is that we don't, say you get a trail camera photo or say somebody shoots a pig, we don't necessarily know, has that thing been 10 generations out in the wild? Has that been 20 generations, or did it escape the fence last Tuesday? We don't always know, because of all the pigs we've ever handled, and it's been a lot, and we've collected hundreds and hundreds of ears over the years, we've never seen an ear tag of any kind. So I think that's a point of concern with respect to the wild boar industry that we need to look at, and certainly some sort of tagging would have been incredibly useful for research. But here we are, and there are the pigs, and that's a database we continue to add to. And as I say, probably check my email at the end of this, and I think two things have probably happened during the time I've talked so far, that we probably got a few more pig occurrences sent to me. And there's probably been at least 1 litter of piglets that were born since the time I started talking. Given the numbers and the distribution, we have a lot of reproduction going on year round. I'll zoom in a little bit there. You can see some of the core, again, the major stronghold in Alberta is here, but we have enough occurrences to be concerned more broadly. And again, this Saskatchewan Alberta border is a critical point of consideration. These animals, of course, can move, do a marathon in a day. 26 miles is easy, and the biggest home range of a collared male over the summer was 410 square kilometers. So they're much bigger home ranges than any of the other native animals we've collared, like elk, deer, moose. It's far, far bigger, far more mobile. If you want to download this map, you can go to our Facebook page. It's just called the Canadian Wild Pig Research Project, and you can actually download this file. It's a little file, and have Google Earth installed, and you can actually then use it as an interactive app. So you can see where pigs are. We also have it for Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and you can see the relative scale. You can click on any county. It'll tell you the number of occurrences in our database. And obviously the darker blue is the more occurrences, and any that are empty haven't had any so far that we're aware of. So we've done quite a lot of effort to try and make this available, not too fine, because we don't want people stacked up on somebody's driveway, showing up because they heard or saw on a map that there's a hot spot. And I see that could be a problem. So after years of sort of talking with people and experimenting, we feel this is, for the public, this is as fine as we're ever going to share. But if you have a farm and you're concerned about pigs, or you're hiking or whatever, this will give you a broad view. You can zoom in and use the satellite imagery to really get a sense of what's going on there. So this is the publicly available data set that people can use. It'll also load into iHunter onto a GPS, so people can use this to sort of inform their agriculture, hunting, and other activities. Impacts, we talked about this a lot, but this is what pasture looks like. This is what grain bags look like. This is a wild pig that hopped the fence and moved in permanently with this group of outdoor pigs. And after a long debate and discussion of trying to buy them, the farmer refused. And all the piglets born on this farm the next spring actually had those horizontal cream-colored stripes. In terms of, this is some work from Ruth showing overlap between domestic pig farms, and this is only up to 2017. So we've got some updated maps coming out soon, and frankly, it's more. This shows any watershed that has wild pigs, but also has domestic pig farms. And the darker red are the more wild boar farms. So this doesn't mean they're in direct contact by any stretch. These watersheds are quite large. But in terms of sort of scoping out where are we most likely to see that occurrence, it's pretty widespread. And unfortunately, as I say, it's gotten quite worse than what I portray here. Dr. Mathieu Prouveau and myself and others have a grant now working in Alberta to do a deeper dive on the livestock side and the disease side. So he's the PI on that, and I'm going to help out. And so there's a lot of work to come here in Alberta, starting up right now. We've been interviewing PhD students and getting ramped up. So a lot of big new steps for Alberta on that, which is really exciting. Just the last couple of slides here, I want to show that, the impacts on other things are important to concern about. We talk a lot about impacts on huntable wildlife for people. And, a lot of hunters say, well, this is so great, we can hunt pigs. And I say, yeah, but you might also expect a complete collapse of your breeding waterfowl. Right now, as we speak, we've got lots and lots of birds on nest. I saw last night there were 410 million birds in the air in the continental US heading to Canada that one night, staggering numbers. And so, but those risks and impacts are very high. In terms of caribou, the overlap is small. So the red is where the pigs are. The yellow is where we have boreal caribou, or what's so-called woodland caribou. Blue are the mountain caribou, and the green are the migratory or barren ground animals. And so we're seeing overlap. We're seeing animals in ranges, and in terms of probably more concerned about habitat damage, but also predation on young animals. And we know that, pigs can take down an adult white-tailed deer and could potentially take caribou or others, but more likely habitat damage and loss of young. And of course, these species, boreal caribou are a species at risk. And so the last thing they need is another nail in the coffin for them. And so that's and the big unknown that we really don't have a great handle on is how much are these going to move north. So in this particular map, this is just in Manitoba, but another case study that we're working on, these black polygons show the entire range of prairie skinks in Canada. So prior to the pig issue, these things have been hanging on by a very thin line and are indeed endangered. But if you overlap the collar data that we have for pigs, we see a lot. And all of these gray watersheds are we have occurrences of various different kinds of data. And so there is almost 100% overlap of pigs. And unfortunately, this, especially this hatched area where the collared animals are, this is by far the hotspot of pigs in Canada. So not only just an overlap, but, or pardon me, a majority of pigs in Manitoba, pardon me, certainly high concentrations there. So big risks there. So lots of concern about species at risk. A couple of points I want to make about some of the sort of reality is that hunter bounties are a guaranteed path to failure. That would, those would reflect a major step backward and certainly have no basis in science or practical experience either. And so that would be my number one point. Any jurisdiction don't use bounties is going to cause, I would say, would be a very good, strong path to absolute failure. Saskatchewan, or pardon me, success in Alberta of all of this around eradication of reducing, you're tied to Saskatchewan. What they do or don't do is really important. And so I think while it's really important to think about what happens in Alberta, absolutely critical, certainly has to recognize Saskatchewan and has to recognize those transboundary movements. Whole sounder removal is critical for sure. Looking as a toolbox, there is no one magic tool that gets rid of pigs that you have to, and Mike talked about all those different things they're doing in Texas. You need a full toolbox and you need to use every tool in your toolbox. And sport hunting is a major barrier to success. You're just not going to get there. I sort of looked at national parks and major cities where there was no hunting, And so basically on the Canadian prairies, it's effectively open season right now. And one thing I've said a lot is you can have open season sport hunting, or you can have wild pig eradication. Pick one. You can't have both, so you got to decide on one. There has been a notable shift in the last 3 years in communications in Canada by governments and others. We've been talking about this for well over a decade, but certainly recognition in the provinces have, I think, probably all said that, you know, sport hunting is not the success story, but this map also shows that it's still open season. So I would say in terms of science policy gap, this is probably one of the biggest ones we have in Canada right now on the prairies where most of the pigs are, is that we have wide open seasons, but there's a message of no sport hunting. And so that mismatch is a fundamental problem. And certainly it is not, while this looks wonderful and people get excited about this, this is not part of the solution, unfortunately, because how many didn't get shot, how many were dispersed around the landscape and spread over to new areas. So while it looks great to have those animals removed, and they can contribute samples for, you know, testing, disease testing and information of where they are, there's useful data. In terms of population, it's not getting you there. Trapping is a fantastic tool. I wholeheartedly support it. I will emphasize that if all you do is trapping, you're probably not going to get there, especially in some of those rougher areas and over those big landscapes. And what I've advocated a long time here in Canada is a combination of helicopter and ground traps so they capitalize on the benefits and limitations of each. And this is our research program. Pardon me, we net them with a net for a bunch of reasons I can talk about later. But that's proven wickedly successful. If you want to find pigs on the landscape and cover hundreds of square kilometers, we have had tremendous success, not only finding them, but we've also demonstrated what Mike mentioned was this Judas pig technique, where you capture an animal, put a collar, a GPS satellite collar, and let it go, remove the other animals, and just track it. Because, you know, we talk about dogs, we in our helicopter, we have infrared cameras. We will also fly fixed wing early in the morning, like Mike was talking about. We'll actually do it when it's minus 35 or colder, and we'll see steam pouring out of those snow caves or those snow shelters the pigs are in. And so under the real cold, that's one of the huge benefits, is you can actually find them through that. But the helicopter capture is incredibly effective for just removal, but also this Judas technique, which I'm a strong advocate for. And we have a ton of data on how well that worked, and on a one-time only basis, for every animal you collared on sort of first time only, you'll get, for every collared animal you remove 9 pigs. And if you continued that for years, obviously that would just keep going up and up. So none of this would be possible without the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We haven't had much of a success record in getting funding within Canada, and so the overwhelming majority is the USDA. And so the folks down there have supported this work in Canada, including Ryan Powers from North Dakota and others, and Kurt Verkotteren and folks like that. The university has been hugely supportive. Some of the early money, we did get some support from Sask Pork and from Fish and Wildlife Development in those early days. And Ruth has a scholarship from Sask Wildlife Federation. So great support there. And I better stop talking. So thanks, I'll pass it over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan. That was amazing. This is really great. We've got lots of questions rolling in. Just a quick reminder to throw them in the Q&A so they don't get lost at the end. And all of our speakers will address your questions during our panel at the very end. So we're a little bit behind time. I'm going to cut into your break. I'm going to cheat you on your break. We're going to have a quick bio break. Go fill up your coffee, your tea, your wine, run to the washroom. We'll meet back in 2 minutes at 7:10. You're going to need a quick break because we're going to push through. We've got a lot to come. We will see you back at 7:10.
Sorry, Megan, I felt like I was going long. I started my timer and then for some reason it stopped on me. So I probably went a fair bit over. How long was I?
I think we're just a bit over. I think people are really engaged, so we won't worry about that. So it's all
It must
good.
be fairly close because we were supposed to have 25 minutes each and it's just after 7. So yeah, we're not terrible.
No, for sure.
I was watching for somebody waving their hand at me to stop, but Normally I have my timer to guide me, but anyway, as you know, I've got too much to say and no mute button.
And everyone wants to hear it though, so it's good stuff. I think folks are thrilled, and there's lots of great questions rolling in the Q&A as well. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Cool,
Awesome.
cool. All right, we'll talk to you in a bit.
Yeah, sounds good. I'm gonna go fill up my water. I'll be back. Okay, folks, that was a really quick break. So hopefully you had a moment to stretch your legs. And so we heard from Mike Bodenchuk from Texas. We got the perspective of, what's been happening down there for the last, many years. And then we just heard from Dr. Ryan Brook in Saskatchewan. So we kind of have the Canadian perspective. We're going to hone in now and talk about what's happening in Alberta. So our first speaker of our second session is Charlotte Shipp, and she's the Industry Programs Manager from Alberta Port. And Charlotte's worked with Alberta Port for 15 years. Wow. So she's worked there in various capacities throughout the organization. And for the last 5 years, Charlotte has served producers in her current role of Industry Programs Manager. In this role, Charlotte liaises with producer, government, and industry to develop programming to support producers and to roll out key initiatives on farm and within industry. And I've also heard Charlotte speak before, and she's absolutely incredibly engaging and so knowledgeable on this topic. Charlotte, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And just before I get going, I just have to say, Mike, Ryan, sitting here listening to you guys speak, every time I do, I think my blood pressure climbs about another 20 points. So probably not ideal for my health, but definitely what needs to happen to keep this initiative going. And, I think it's so valuable to sit here and talk about why we care about this at-large population from an industry perspective. And it was really Megan that brought that to us and said, well, why does Alberta Port care so much? Why do you now suddenly come to the table and be very concerned about wild boar at large? So that's what I will try to walk you through here. And I'll go through this pretty quickly because Ryan did touch on this, but as he said, they're not native to Alberta. They were imported here in the 80s and the 90s as farmed livestock. And I think we were a little arrogant in that decision to bring them here. We thought for sure we could contain them. And even if they did escape, we didn't think, they would actually survive in our habitats. But man, have they ever taught us a few things. So yes, definitely those escaped animals have what's created our populations here now. As Ryan indicated, industry's kind of been loosely engaged. When I first came on at Alberta Pork, one move that we did make that I think was a good one was to include wild boar as a pest under the pest and nuisance control regulation. And that's what's really given us the opportunity to push ahead with eradication now. So that was definitely a good move. And it's also very important for us to recognize that under this regulation, our landowners do have a requirement to take measures to control or destroy any pests that are on their land. So that does require or place some accountability back on our landlords, but it also creates some challenges for them too as they try to work and meet their requirements as we try to eradicate this species. Here is a map of Alberta, and this is based, you'll see, just on the sightings that we've had reported to the Alberta government or through the Squeal on Pigs campaign. This is January 2021, so not the most recent data. But when you look at it and you compare back to some of the maps that Ryan presented, you really can see this trend across central Alberta and west of Edmonton here. That is kind of where those large populations are. As we go south, we definitely see fewer sightings and have those reported much less frequently. And we're not fully sure yet that those are wild boar, but we also want to be very cautiously optimistic at this stage that they're not. But that being said, we have to be very careful, as we've seen through both Mike and Ryan's presentations, that they're an incredibly adaptive animal, and those very well still could be. Definitely there's more information needed on the population of wild boar here in Alberta. We haven't really got any good research going here in Alberta, and I'm qualifying that because it's just starting. And as Ryan has indicated, industry's really just started to tackle this issue. But you know, the lead research has all been done mainly by the University of Saskatchewan from Dr. Ryan Brook and his team, as you've seen. But we are quite excited now to see some research starting at the University of Calgary. So we look forward to seeing that take hold, as well as we learn more and more about the population here, specifically in Alberta. So, you know, to tell you why we care, I've got to walk you through some just kind of background on the Canadian pork industry and the Alberta pork industry. So this is a bit dry, but we'll try just to push through it here. But in Canada, the industry is about a $23.8 billion industry to our economy. In Alberta, that translates to roughly $1.6 billion. And I always like to try to relate things back to people. So that's, you know, just over 6,000 jobs. They're people and households that are dependent upon the pork industry here in Canada. It's also, and I just want to kind of plant this thought in your head for now, but you know, Canada and Alberta both, we are export driven. So we do export roughly 70% of the pork that we produce here in Canada, with our top export markets being the US, Japan, China, Mexico, and of course, South Korea. So again, just kind of loosely keep that in the back of your mind here as we move forward. So really, being that we're export driven, you know, to look at this issue, you have to recognize that we're a participant in a global pork industry. And that's really where this concern comes from about wild boar for us from an industry perspective. And as a part of that global trading industry, we have what we call the World Organization for Animal Health. And that's the OIE. And the OIE kind of governs and sets the rules of trade by which, you know, livestock commodities will operate under internationally. So Canada, of course, and all of those key trading partners that I referenced earlier are members of the OIE. So that's also very important to keep in mind. And the OID maintains a reportable diseases list. And these are diseases which are of an international concern. And that's because they have a strong ability to impact either food security or have significant economic impacts to the country or other countries. As a part of the agreements with the OIE, you can have 3 different statuses: free, outbreak, and endemic. Canada maintains a free status for every disease on the reportable disease list right now. Our worst case scenario would be transitioning to outbreak status. And there's a ton of work that has to happen to regain your free status once you climb over to that outbreak status. And of course, the nightmare that would keep us all up at night would be if one of these diseases were to become endemic. It's also important to know that if you find the disease in your country and you're a member of the OIE, you do have to declare it. So, and there's certain time requirements placed on these agreements that dictate how quickly we have to declare it. So that's really important. And from the moment we make that declaration, what you're going to see is that all of our trading partners are going to stop their imports of our product. So just pause and kind of hold that in the back of your mind there for a little bit. And I put the slide in just for Ryan, because I think he's earned it, and he should hear this occasionally. But this has very much been the pork industry. We've been that ostrich in the sand, aware of the wild boar problem, but just ignoring it, to be quite honest, and just sitting there saying everything is just fine. So that brings us back to this question of what really has piqued industry's concern, and Ryan spoke to it earlier, and it's African swine fever. To kind of take a look at this disease, I'm just going to click this little video, and it's a little bit dated, and hopefully this pops up on your screen okay. But this takes a look at ASF over in Europe and Russia and its spread. So where you see those red dots popping up, that's pockets of ASF spreading. Where you see the pockets popping up close together, that's likely animal to animal transmission. Where you see those large leaps in ASF, that's likely human related transmission or introduction of the disease into new areas. So we're just going to sit here and watch this. And this is, Alberta pork is still sitting there as that ostrich in the sand, not really paying too much attention to the issue. And once we get kind of towards the end of the timeline here on this map, you'll start to see why our concerns got peaked. And I'll just encourage you to kind of watch China, because it happens very quickly at the end. So we'll just sit here and watch. October 2017 is coming up. You're really starting to see ASF spread and take a hold there. And pretty quick, bam, there she is. She's spreading through China. And that's a major concern for us because, of course, China is a major trading partner for Canada, and not just for pork, but for all sorts of different products. And when we look at that, we ask ourselves, China was ASF free, and then all of a sudden, bam, they got it. So what happened there? And what we believe is the case is that essentially, human food waste from Russia after they hosted the Olympics there was imported into China and fed to their livestock. And that's what caused the introduction of ASF into China. So when we talk about how this disease spreads later, these things are pretty important. Also, we have the German example in which ASF arrived in the wild boar population. So the exact scenario that we would be talking about here. And we're also seeing ASF in the Dominican Republic, and exactly how it got there and how long it's been there, the information isn't quite clear, but what we do know is that it's very close to home. So that starts to make everybody quite nervous. And now, Ryan, this one's for you too. I do think we can agree that industry's head is out of the sand, and we are officially, we've got our silks on, we've got our numbers, and we are off to the races on this eradication side of things. So to dive a little bit more into African swine fever, and I'll try not to bore you with all of the details and just kind of focus in on the relevant ones, but ASF is a DNA virus. It infects any kind of pig, whether it's a wild pig, domestic pig, young pig, old pig, and noteworthy as well, soft ticks, because we're starting to see some of those pop up in southern Alberta as well. ASF is one of the most severe viral diseases of pigs. And as I said earlier, it attacks any pig of any age. Quite often in our industry, we'll see diseases that just attack pigs at certain stages of production, but that's not the case with ASF. It's also very much worth mentioning that it's not a zoonotic disease. So humans cannot catch ASF from infected pigs or from meat products, which is why you can actually find ASF in some imported meat products, which of course is one of our major concerns. It's also worth mentioning there is no vaccine currently available for ASF that could be put into place or could be used. What are you going to see in your pig? You're going to see fevers, you're going to see weakness, you're going to see breathing problems, vomiting, diarrhea, red or blue blotches of the skin. And nobody likes this term, but that's because it's a hemorrhagic fever really at its root. In your sow barns, you'll see a ton of miscarriages, abortions, poor litters. You're looking at a very high mortality rate within the first 10 days post-infection. It's hemorrhagic fever. And this one is kind of scary, guys. If the pig survives the infection, they can shed the virus for up to 6 months. So if we just pause and try to translate this into a situation that we've all recently dealt with, which is COVID, could you imagine how hard it would be to try to return to work or even get life back to normal and contain a disease if a person could still shed it for 6 months? So that's really something to just kind of pause and take note of. ASF is not something that we want in this country, and we do not want to try to deal with the aftermath thereafter. So as I mentioned earlier, we've got it in Africa, we've got it in Europe, we've got it in Asia, we have it in the Dominican Republic, and many more locations throughout the world. So now we have to start to look at how is that ASF being transmitted? What are our risks to our country? And you can have, of course, your direct transmission, which is between a sick and a healthy animal. but there's probably more the concern for us in Canada is the indirect transmission. And the scenario I like to go to quite readily is the feeding of garbage containing infected meat. And that's exactly the scenario that we saw that brought ASF into China. It can also spread from various fomites, vehicles, implements. So that's really human transmission, carrying that disease from one place to another. But one of the scenarios I always kind of like to walk through, and I probably need to update the scenario based on current, global politics, but, say you go visit your grandmother over in Russia where there is ASF, you can have ASF in your meat products. Maybe grandma makes you your favorite sausage. You bring that home with you. Perhaps you didn't quite keep it cool the whole way. So by the time you get home, that sausage really isn't any good. So you can't eat it. You end up throwing it out. It ends up in a landfill, and then it gets eaten by someone in our wild boar population, and bam, now we have ASF in Canada. So that's how easily something like this can happen. And, over the last 2-3 years, people haven't been moving because of the COVID movement controls, but now people are moving again. So this is very much a real risk for us. ASF, just to make it even harder to deal with, it's a tough bug to kill. It's resistant to many chemicals and low temperatures. And again, that tends to be Canada's get out of jail free card is our climate likes to kill off a lot of disease. Unfortunately, that's not going to be the case with ASF. And it persists for a very, very long time and in a whole bunch of different products. So below I've kind of outlined that for you. So in manure, you can see ASF is still present for 11 days. In bone marrow, that can be for months. In chilled meat products, that's 15 weeks. And this one's a real doozy, a cured ham for 3 to 6 months. And the longevity and viability of that virus in that ham, because there's quite a bit of variability there, is likely going to depend on how that product was cured and how well that process happened. But all very, very, very concerning when you look at it from an attempt to control or eradicate a disease. So if you remember back when I said that we're an export-based commodity. So really ASF is a trade issue. So if ASF is detected in Canada, our trading partners are going to stop their imports. So effectively our border is now closed. We've lost our free status and now we're sitting in outbreak status. We don't have a vaccine and this is a very difficult bug to kill. So I spared all of the gruesome pictures, but I did throw one in just for effect. And what you'll see is that industry will have to stamp out or essentially cull all of the infected animals to eradicate this disease. Once that process is complete, we will then have to go through various different steps to prove back to the OIE that Canada has indeed eradicated the virus. And we hopefully can regain our free status when we do that. So that involves massive culling of animals, extensive surveillance, and unbelievable biocontainment and biosecurity practices to help safeguard the industry and get that free status back. So that's really just our infected animals. But what about that 70% that's exported? Our markets are gone. These pigs don't have a home. Pigs are not like cattle. You can't just toss them out on pasture and hold them over until the situation changes. So it's going to result in massive culling of those animals as well. And as these animals are now healthy, because they're not being culled for a disease purpose, they're being culled because the market is lost, the producers are not going to receive compensation for those animals that have to be culled. So not only are we culling animals, but we're absolutely devastating our farm families. And I think that's something we really need to just pause and think about for a moment. So going back to those economic impact numbers, we're essentially paring an industry back by 70% to meet what we can consume here in Canada alone. So that $23.8 billion industry drops to a $7.14 billion industry. In Alberta, that's a $1.6 billion hit, dropping to $500 million. And in this is some real basic math, guys. I have not included in here any of the costs to try to eradicate the disease, to depopulate or to do any of the surveillance. This is straight economic impact numbers. So that's pretty alarming. And I think we can all agree right now in Canada and particularly in Alberta, the last thing anybody needs is another hit to our economy. So let's just pause and take a look at the situation in Germany, because I think that's a really good analogy for what could happen in Alberta. Germany is the European Union's second largest pork exporter, so very similar to Alberta pork in that it's very much in the export market. The exact scenario that we're talking about happened in Germany, where ASF was discovered in the wild pig populations. That was back in the fall of 2020. There were no cases in their commercial herd. But nevertheless, because of those OIE agreements, China, Japan, South Korea, and the Philippines immediately banned German pork. And I think you'll note there that 3 out of 4 of those countries are the same trading partners that we also trade with. So it would be absolutely foolish for us to sit here and expect a different outcome than what we see right there. Early estimates, and there's still very early estimates of the cost of ASF to the German pork industry is $1 billion. And I would argue that's very low, because the impact of this is still being felt across the world. It's still having a strong impact on the movement of pigs, on various markets and international pricing as well. This can be very doom and gloom, so I do like to focus on a little bit of positive here. Our trading partners may choose to allow some imports back into their countries, but really the time that that's going to take is dependent upon the relationships that we have in place with those international trading partners and any agreements that we may have already established. So that brings us back to, a really nice piece of good news, which is in spring of 2021, Canada and the US did sign an agreement to regulate trade in the event that ASF is detected in the wild pigs. So that's a huge win. That does mean that, if ASF pops up in either the feral populations in the US or up here in Canada, there is still a market for some of those pigs, and that will reduce some of the culling that we have to do that's based solely on market driven. It's only one trading partner at this point in time, so it's an excellent step in the right direction, but definitely much more work is required. We are working on an agreement with Japan, but that's not quite in place as of yet. So that's why we're concerned. The next step, and I'll try to move this quickly because I think you've heard lots about this, is what are we doing here in Alberta to try to get ahead of this issue? We're definitely looking towards eradication, and we're still hopeful that we can eradicate these from our landscapes. We took Alberta Agriculture's wild boar eradication pilot program, and we partnered with them and the Alberta Invasive Species Council to really tackle eradication and go full steam ahead. And it is important that I mention here that we're looking to eradicate wild boar that are at large, not farmed, because as Ryan indicated, there are still some wild boar farms here in Alberta. We are looking at whole sounder eradication, so we're generally not open to any approaches that don't tackle whole sounder. We've added a whole bunch more traps and equipment, and of course, boots on the ground. So who you see there is Larry and Scarlett. They're 2 of our exceptionally hardworking contractors that are out there in the field every day, day in, day out, working to eradicate wild boar. And this, I need to update this. We actually just recently brought on another fellow by the name of Buck, who has joined our team to add some extra resources to it. I don't yet have a good picture of Buck, but hopefully that'll come in the next few weeks here. We've also, a lot of people probably saw this news article, and it certainly did educate me on the value of our bison herd that's sitting in Elk Island National Park. So now I didn't realize, but that bison herd actually provides the genetics for a lot of our bison herds throughout North America. And there's a lot of concern now that we've seen wild boar in Elk Island Park that we could have disease transmission to the bison herd there. So what we've done is we've partnered with Parks Canada, in particular the team at Elk Islands National Park, to expand our eradication program into the national park. As I mentioned there, we've added another personnel, and that's Buck, and that's to help get additional boots on the ground in more areas of concern. And I think, you know, Ryan will be happy to hear this one too, is that we have now formed a Western Wild Pig Working Group. And this consists of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. We're coming together roughly monthly to try to coordinate our efforts, share some data about what we're finding, and probably just as importantly, sharing those practices that we're finding are working really well or perhaps not so well, as we now all jointly work towards pursuing eradication here in the prairie provinces. And, you know, I just love, there's no better feedback than the feedback we get from Larry and Scarlett on the ground. So what I've dropped in here are some of the comments that we've heard from them. And the first one here is that some landowners are essentially hesitant to report the damage because there's no insurance or reimbursement for that damage. Whereas a landowner, if say they report the damage as bear or elk, there is compensation available for them. So that's a red flag for us to watch as an industry. The other side of it is really working with our landowners. So protecting their privacy, communicating with them, respecting their land. These are all essential parts of us gaining access to the land and pursuing eradication. And this last one, and I suspect you'll see this popping out as a theme, addresses hunting. And I'm going to read this verbatim because I think Scarlett says it so very well here. Hunting is not an effective way to manage or decrease the wild boar population. We are able to eradicate and have wild boar activity throughout the year, even when they have access to food outside our sites. Come hunting season, wild boar traffic comes to a sudden halt. No wild boar activity happens for over a month after hunting season is over. So this really does confirm, you know, with just basic evidence on the ground, that hunting is not the solution. Finally, again, because I like a little bit of optimism, we are starting to see some enthusiasm from our landowners that we are taking aggressive action on eradication. So that's always great to see, because the landowners really are an essential component of this strategy in giving us the intel and the knowledge that we need to find these guys and the sounders. Some of the changes that we've seen here, we were successful in partnering with AISC, who manages our crop insurance and wildlife damage compensation program here in Alberta. And with our recent fall announcement, we have now seen that a wild boar have been added to the approved species list. So that addresses that first point there, where if a landowner now suspects that there is damage to their crop from wild boar, they can report it as wild boar and actually get compensated for it. So I think that's a really big win for us as industry. I think it'll also help us to inform and get more sightings. Of course, receiving reimbursement format does require that landowner to work with us and our approved contractors to support eradication as well. We're also working with our municipalities throughout Alberta to simply prohibit wild boar. The last thing we need is another wild boar farm popping up. We need to limit at least the expansion of that segment of industry. And then finally, and this one will probably upset a few folks, but we are working towards legislation to prohibit, full stop, prohibit hunting in Alberta and across Canada of all wild boar. Now, I think the other two speakers, Mike and Ryan, have touched on this already, but I think it's a point well worth emphasizing, is that wild boar are smart. They're incredibly smart, and hunting scatters them and educates them. So there's a sounder of 14. I couldn't even count the number in that one photo that Ryan posted. You might go in there, you might shoot one, you might shoot two, maybe you got a friend, you shoot 3 or you shoot 4. But you have now just taught 10 other wild boar what human behavior and hunting is all about. And you won't see those wild boar again. And to make that even worse, they pass that knowledge down generationally. So not only have you educated those 10 wild boar, but you have educated all of the progeny that result from them moving forward. And this is why we're taking a position against hunting, and you've heard it very clear from my other speakers. We want to eradicate. We are still optimistic that we can eradicate here in Alberta, and therefore we have to stop the hunting of wild boar here in Alberta. And with that, we are asking everybody out there who's listening to please, please, please squeal on pigs. You can do so very easily if you see them or if you suspect that there's evidence of them, even if you're not sure. Take a picture, fire it into that email, af.wildboar@gov.abca, or if you like to pick up the phone, call 310-FARM, and our team will follow up on that. And I think I was just going to go to questions from there, but we're going to hold those to the panel. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Charlotte. That was awesome. That was really, really good. We will hold questions to the panel. There are a ton of great questions coming in, so please keep those coming. Perfect. Yeah, so we're going to move right along to our next speaker. So we have Jurgen Preitjes, who is a landowner who's going to talk to us about his experience dealing with wild boar at large. So Jurgen was a past chair of the Canadian Pork Council, Alberta Pork and Canadian Swine Breeders. And additionally, he has been an independent purebred swine breeder for 45 years and one of the founding shareholders of Peak Swine Genetics. Jurgen has served on many other provincial, national, and international boards. And I think I'm really looking forward to hearing from Jurgen. So over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Megan, and my pleasure to be part of this as well. And I've really appreciated the present that came prior on the history. I was going to share a little bit of history that is more just our rural area, our local area here, which Ryan has indicated several times is the hot spot in Alberta. Now, going back to the 1980s, a good friend of mine brought, I believe, the first herd of wild boars to farm here, and he was so proud of that. And I, at that time, mentioned to him, I said, be careful, make sure they don't get out, because you have the ability to destroy my livelihood as a hog farm, and especially since I was selling genetics around the world. Health is not only limited to the disastrous, say, ASF or other foreign animal diseases, but even to any other small diseases that all of a sudden prevent you from selling breeding stock, not only internationally, but also to other farms where we made most of our living. But anyways, as time progressed and the industry collapsed, he said to me very proudly, he says, I opened the gate, I cut off all the ear tags so nobody knew whose pigs they were. That's maybe, Ryan, why you don't see many ear tags. He cut off the ear tags and opened the gates and said, finally, I'll be able to hunt these animals like I used to hunt them in Germany. And so I was quite concerned about this at that time. I was a director with Alberta Pork and brought it up on several occasions, and also to government, that they needed to nip this in the bud. And the response I got from both politicians and bureaucrats was, you don't know anything. These animals will never survive in our cold climate. You have nothing to worry about. We don't have to do anything. And I told them from the history of my family that grew up, or that my father farmed in East Prussia, which had a similar climate to here. Wild pigs flourished there. But of course, they knew more than we did and did absolutely nothing. So I really am happy that now we are, albeit way too late, we're trying to do something about it. And I really appreciate the work of Alberta Pork and the Alberta Invasive Species Council for working on this, and the research and cooperation that's now taking place. And so I do hope that education and all of these things in the toolbox will help. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the experiences that we've had since those pigs were released, and we had other farms in the area that pigs have escaped, not intentionally, but through poor containment, let's call it. And that was very close to where our farm is. And so this area west of where I live has had a tremendous number of wild boars now. And Megan, if you want to just throw up the first picture, I do have a few pictures from a neighbor of mine that they're grain and cattle farmers. And so when they're out on the fields, often they run into these animals. Now, this was just a baby pig he shot 2 years ago. You know, I don't know, he was about 600 or 650 pounds. And you can see Bobby's about 6'1" or so. And that boar stretches a little bigger than that. And when they cut him open, he was full of blue peas. Now, anyone who doesn't know what blue peas are, it's your seed peas. They had seeded a field of peas, and this boar went in and just filled his belly up with peas behind the seeder. So that's the sort of damage that they do. And I'm not sure if it was only the one boar eating those, but probably a lot of others. So that's just one of the damages of crops that they do. As well, or in this area, we've seen this a lot. They create a lot of damage in oat fields, especially some grain fields. And we've had people growing corn now, and they love corn. And you don't even know they're in there all summer. And then when you start harvesting, the middle has all been harvested. So, you know, it is quite damaging. So just move another picture forward there for me, please, Megan. So now this is on the disease side. Not all wild boars are healthy. This is one pig he shot, and we don't know what actually was wrong with him. He never sent it into the veterinarian or anything. But I mean, this is the kind of thing that keeps me awake at night as a producer. If an animal like that comes close to our animals. Now, we have pretty good biosecurity, and none of our animals are outside anymore. But those, you know, the small farms around that have their, let's call it natural pigs that are running around outside, you get an animal like this come in, who knows what sort of illness they're going to bring into your herd. And, you know, these animals, I think it was Ryan showed a picture of a boar in with a domestic sow. We actually had another neighbor here a number of years ago. This would have been back in the 90s yet. He was happy when one of the boars jumped into his pen and mated his sows. He thought he was going to have better pigs. They're going to be hardier pigs and much better. When he found out later on that those pigs took an extra 2 months to get to market, he wasn't quite as happy. But again, this is the sort of damage they can do if your pigs are outside and they can jump into your pens and then spread whatever it is they have. Just move on to another picture here. So this one here was he shot a sow with its little pigs. Those are just tiny little baby pigs, and there are 3. He had more, but the three are in the picture. So those I mean, they look wonderfully cute, don't they? But in actual fact, those other pictures we saw, how quickly they can multiply is incredible. And I think we have one more picture. This is just them at large, a smaller group. We had Bobby's wife was driving home just a mile from my house, and she's driving, and all of a sudden she sees this black carpet running across in front of her. She's driving a Tiguan or Touareg, and she didn't even know what it was, and it was at night, and all of a sudden it hits her, and it turns out it was a whole sounder of black wild boar running across. Fortunately, it didn't damage her vehicle. It hit ran into the side of it, and several of them hit it, but no damage, and the pigs didn't seem to be hurt either. But those are the kinds of things that can happen. Another neighbor here, they look out one evening, and on their deck, the pig is eating the dog food. A big boar eating a dog food. Now, if you have your child outside there, I mean, this raises really, really big concerns. So I think there's a lot of things that can happen to us on the farm, and the damages that are being caused. I know it's a good move that AFSC now will be paying for damages created by wild boars, but I think even more important, and I think it's been brought up especially by Charlotte, is the fact of what it can do to our industry. And I really appreciate what all the guys that are speaking here today, their care and their help in trying to solve a problem. But I can tell you, I'm the only one here that it's my livelihood. It's if anything like African swine fever comes in, I'm bankrupt the next day. Even though we're a third generation farm here, if our industry shuts down, we sell, now we're a contract producer, I don't sell breeding stock anymore, but we market 40,000 pigs a year, and that would stop overnight. And our barns are shut down, and without income, you can't make payments, you're done for. And so when I hear our government announcing a bounty, which we've all heard here today, how detrimental that is to controlling wild boars, then I get extremely concerned why we are doing something that is actually going to propagate the problem rather than help it. And I think it is a great thing that Alberta Pork and the Alberta Invasive Species Council have sponsored this forum, that we can talk about this and hopefully bring our government to its senses. And I'm talking not only Alberta's, but Western Canada's, and still try to attempt to eradicate this problem, because it will at some point create major problems for our industry. And it can also affect the cattle industry. If foot and mouth is brought in through wild boars, which it can happen the same as ASF, it hits the cattle industry just as hard as the hog industry. So with that, Megan, thank you again for inviting me, and thank you to all those that are listening today.
Thank you so much, Jürgen. It was so good to hear your perspective. And I mean, when you're talking about things like your livelihood, that's big. That's a big deal. Absolutely. So we really appreciate you sharing your perspective and your experiences with us tonight. So sit tight. We've got questions coming in. Thank you, Jürgen. We're going to move right along to our final speaker of the evening. So we have Don Fortin joining us. So Don is currently the agricultural fieldman for Woodlands County, which is, a pretty big wild boar hotspot in Alberta. So Dawn was raised on a farm in the Westlock area, and her career path after university has taken her from a weed inspector, a weed sprayer, to an assistant ag fieldman, to an agricultural fieldman, and then to an instructor at Olds College, and then back to an ag fieldman at Woodlands County. So in 2001, she moved closer to home to Woodlands County, and she's the manager of agricultural services, where she's been for 21 years, Dawn. How is that even possible? She currently resides in the hamlet of Fort Assiniboine with her 3 fur babies, 2 dogs and a cat. I'm sure we might see some of those this evening, who knows? And Dawn is very actively involved in the family farm near Westlock, which has celebrated the Century Family Farm in 2018. So Dawn, over to you. And folks, get your questions in the Q&A and we'll get to them after Dawn's presentation.
Okay, can you see my screen, Megan?
I can see it. Yeah, you bet.
Okay,
Just need to presenter mode that and we'll be perfect.
it's just having a. There we go.
Perfect.
All right, so yeah, a lot of what I'm going to be talking. Thank you very much, Megan, for the invite to speak, and for everyone who is listening in today. So a lot of what I have to share has already been shared, which is kind of cool that we're all along on the same page. It's kind of exciting. So I'm going to talk about our experience of wild boar in Woodlands County. And as Megan mentioned, I have been here for a few years. I started very young. So, so we'll get into the presentation. So this is where Woodlands County is located in Alberta. We are actually the geographic center of Alberta. We do have a little cairn that says this is the geographic center, so it's kind of cool. But yeah, we're just a little bit to the northwest of Edmonton is where we're located. About 170 kilometers. In fact, within the boundaries of Woodlands County, like I mentioned, we have the geographical center of Alberta. Our total area is just over 750,000 hectares. And within our municipality, we have 4 major rivers, the Athabasca, McLeod, Freeman, and Paddle rivers. So this is basically our municipal map. So you can see a majority of our county is actually crown land. So that presents a bit of a problem with us for the wild boar in terms of providing really great habitat for them. So that's kind of where our struggle is as well, partially. So our issues, I guess, started as people have mentioned previous, or the wild boar were imported in Alberta in the late 1980s, early 90s to diversify farms. And this was also that we had the meat production as well as hunt farms established at this time. So, and at the time, as I believe Charlotte mentioned, they were not expected to survive our harsh winters without shelter. So we do have one producer in our municipality still, and it is Hog Wild Specialties. So they do produce meat, fresh and processed. So those are going into the higher end restaurants and hotels in Edmonton, resorts in Banff as well. And they also do boar hunts on their farm. And so there's just some photographs of their livestock. Notice I said livestock because they are contained. So what is a pest? We've talked about this as well in with the Alberta Agricultural Pests Act. It does state it is an animal, bird, insect, plant, or disease that is destroying or harming or likely to destroy or harm any land, livestock, or property, and they may be declared a pest or a nuisance. So the regulations also state that wild boar is declared to be a pest where it is at large in Alberta. So that's a little bit of legislation for you. It does describe the duty of individual, which Charlotte also mentioned during her talk. So they are required to prevent the establishment of pests and control the pests on the land as well. And then also it does describe the duty of the local authority, which is also to prevent the establishment of or to control or destroy pests in the municipality. So again, here's the responsibilities of the landowners. They are to have sufficient containment standards. They need to do the livestock identification, and they are accountable as well. So they have to be vigilant in their operations because they do own a potential pest. So this is just a little graphic to show you what makes the wild boar so resilient. And as other speakers have also mentioned, these are kind of what makes them able to survive in our winters. So in Woodlands County, we did get in 1991 is approximately when our local producer was raising wild boar for meat production. And just to be fair, he has not been the only wild boar producer in our municipality. We have had others. He is the only existing one at this point. So, or they are the only existing one at this point. So we did start seeing problems being reported first in the late 90s, early 2000s. And then it was at this location was actually a stop on the Provincial Agriculture Service Board summer tour in 1997 to actually showcase agricultural diversity. And at one time, the farm had anywhere from 300 to 700 animals on site, and currently he's down to about 100 wild boar. So then it got all political. We started seeing reports coming into the municipal offices. We have 2 in our county. Also, councilors and our agriculture services board members were receiving complaints about the wild boar from producers in areas that were adjacent to the producer in our municipality that they had escaped. The complaints about the wild boar at large, and there was causing damage to a lot of the crops and also just infrastructure in the area. And there were numerous complaints. Some of these were directly sent to our local MLAs, local RCMP, and the Fish and Wildlife Office. So most of the common complaints were things like damage to the standing crops, where they would flatten crops, root up pits in the field. Damage to stacked bales, boards would burrow into them, break them apart, and then they would urinate and the feces would make them unfit for feed. The wild boar could also be aggressive and pose potential danger to people as well as to livestock. And contamination of water sources and damage to riparian areas. And then finally, vehicular collision concerns was also one of the complaints received. So we have other issues, things like damage to property, grain bins being torn open so the wild boar can access the feed inside, as well as other storage, feed storage and fences and the like. Also disease spread, as we've heard already, between the wildlife as well as livestock, pets, and potentially humans. As Charlotte mentioned, not as much of a concern with African swine flu, but there could be others. So. And also they compete with wildlife and destroy ground nesting bird eggs, and the erosion and destruction of the fish habitat when they are affecting those riparian areas is also a concern. So this is some of photographs that I've taken with some damage to some riparian areas. So you can see the rooting here, just tearing up the ground. They're, well, just like a domestic pig, they like to root, right? So damages to field crops. Jürgen mentioned oat crop damage. So here we've got an oat field, and it's basically like a super highway going through here. We've got a little path where they've been running and just flattening to lay in. And this is also some stacked bales, and you can see the holes where they've gone into to create nests and such in those bales. So a lot of damage can be caused by these little fellows. We've had several resolutions going to the Provincial Ag Service Board Conference beginning in 2001, where we were asking Alberta Agriculture to take responsibility to remove the wild boars running at large. At that time, it was defeated. And in 2002, another resolution was put forth to have inspectors be responsible for the capture and removal of the Dangerous Animals under the Stray Animals Act. So that one actually did pass and then was forwarded on to the various levels of government. In 2003, we had another defeated resolution, that would outlaw the raising of wild boar in Alberta and eradicate all remaining wild boar in captivity in Alberta. So that one, like I mentioned, was defeated. And then in 2009, we also had another resolution going forth, and that one was to implement a permit system for raising wild boar, as also to implement fencing requirements to prevent escapes. So it's been an issue. It's gone through the provincial level on several occasions, and yet here we are. So we did have the original bounty program, which did originate in Lac St. Anne County. In early 2003, Alberta Agriculture, Food and Rural Development was requested to assist in the development of a eradication plan for Lac St. Anne County. And that was when the pilot project was initiated with wild boar at large in Lac St. Anne County added to the Agricultural Pests Act. So at that time, it was only in Lac St. Anne that they were considered a pest when at large. Initially, it was a $20,000 setup to advertise and pay out on the bounty. And also the municipality did manufacture a wild boar trap so that local producers could try and live trap the boar. And that this was just a single animal trap that was used. So as I mentioned, that bounty was implemented in Lac St. Anne County in 2003, and then 2008, it went province-wide. And at that time, it was a payment of $50 per pair of boar ears. And also the hunter had to have written permission from the landowner at the time. So provincially, from 2008 to 2015, we had just under 1,000 ear pairs, so 996 ear pairs collected in Woodlands County. In that same period of time, we had 236 ear pairs collected. So as you can see, we have evidence that we are one of the hot spots. Awesome. So, but for the entire time that we participated in the program, so from 2008 to the end of the program in 2017, there was a total of 267 ear pairs collected in Woodlands County. So what that program did was help to establish kind of an identification map as to where we could find where we were gathering a lot of those ears from. So it gave us an idea of where we had issues. And so the program was successful to the point of motivating landowners to hunt wild boar, which they may or may not have done otherwise. On a positive note, did it eradicate the pest? Unfortunately, it did not. So with the new bounty program released on April 5th of 2022, Woodlands County is not eligible to participate, as we are participating in the entire sound ear trapping program with Alberta Agriculture and Alberta Pork. So that's kind of a good thing for us, I believe. We did have the fencing requirements, containment standards announced in 2014 with the grace period to comply, and that had to be all fully in place, conformed by December 31st of 2018. So we did have 2 levels of standard basically for the fence. So we could have a buried electrical wire, buried fence with an electrical wire, minimum height and buried minimum as well, or a double fencing system with electric wire as well. So the fencing standards were, I think, a definite positive for us because it did help to alleviate some of the escapes, I believe. So this is just a sample or example of the fence line previous to the fencing requirements, and then afterwards he has reinforced that quite a bit since that the standards have come in. And we're still working with him. We do have to do an annual inspection of the fence line. So we do go out and take a look and make sure that it is being done. So you can see it's a much heavier gauge wire that he's used. This was the past wire, easy to cut through. And that was what some of his complaints were, is that he was getting people coming and cutting the wire, which allowed his animals to escape. So, and he does also have an electric fencing system as well. And you can see that wire running right there. So this is as he was in the process of putting up the fence there. So we've had lots of publicity over the years, and you've probably seen a lot of these articles, news reports, etc. There's also online hunting blogs. There are Facebook pages for wild boar hunters. The Alberta Wild Boar Facebook page, for example, is one of those. So there's lots of publicity, lots of social media activity as well. And every media event that occurs, we get inundated with calls from expert hunters that want to come and save us and come and fix our problem. So this last month and a half, I've been receiving those phone calls again. So, and we do not maintain, so what they're looking for is a list of landowners that they could contact that have had wild boar problems, and we don't maintain a list of landowners. And even if we did, it would be a foipable issue, so we can't even release those names. So it is the responsibility of hunters to go out and contact landowners directly. And currently, we do not encourage hunting in our municipality. We can't stop it, but we certainly don't encourage it. So what are we doing now? So like I mentioned, we are working with Alberta Agriculture, Food and Rural Economic Development and Alberta Pork in the trapping eradication program. So that is the entire sounder removal, and it was initiated in 2016 with Woodlands County and Lac St. Anne County, and then we started the trapping in 2018. So to date, since 2018, we've had a total of 210 wild boar being removed from the landscape. So if you do some simple math, you know, I think you can see which is going to be more effective, but that's just simple math, and we'll just leave it at that. So these pictures are just some examples of what our traps are looking like. So they are the heavy gauge wire. We've got a remotely deployed gate that is triggered by a cell phone. And there's also game cameras on sites as well. So, and here's just some game cam photos of some of the animals in our municipality that are not any longer. We are also very involved with Squeal on Pigs. We're in partnership with the Alberta Invasive Species Council, as well as many other supporters. And this is, as was mentioned, a focus on education and reporting of the sightings and damage of wild boar at large. So we do promote the program on social media and our county website. And as well, we do financially help contribute as well. So moving forward, we're going to continue to be working with our local producer to maintain those fencing standards. Like I mentioned, we do an annual inspection of that fence line. We are going to continue in the trapping program and with potential expansion, depending on the availability of the traps, of course. And what's really positive is having the addition of another trapper on site. That's exciting to know that that's expanding. So we will also continue promotion and participation of the Squeal on Pigs program. And we are currently looking at potentially doing a project with eDNA sampling in the green zone waterways. And that will be in conjunction with a couple of neighboring municipalities. So we're just going to be monitoring some of our waterways where there are no pigs located, like domestic pigs. And if we do find porcine DNA, we know that we potentially got some wild boar in that area. So that's kind of an exciting project that we're just in the infancy stages of, but something that we're working toward. So just a little comic relief for you. Some comics that I found that were pig related. So, and with that, that is the end of my presentation. There is my contact information if anyone would like to contact me in future. And with that, I guess we go into our questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dawn. That was wonderful. Thanks for sharing all those details. And you've been dealing with this issue for a long time, 21 years. Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. So I'm going to invite all of our speakers to pop back up if you want to put your video on. Mike, I didn't think to ask what time it was in Texas right now. I don't know. Are we looking at a big time difference?
No, it's a little after 9. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Not too bad, but getting late. Okay. So
Yeah.
we'll be conscious of that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump into the Q&A and I'm going to start from the most current questions first. And I know some have been addressed, so thanks to our speakers for doing that. So the first question is from an anonymous attendee, and they asked, should fencing standards be applicable to pasture-raised pigs on hobby farms because of the potential for adding to the issue? Would anyone like to tackle that?
I will say that I teach a third-year course called Animals, Agriculture, and the Environment. And one of the sort of running jokes in my course is that almost any answer to any question you will ever get in the course is education and fencing are good answers that will probably get you at least partial grades. And so I firmly believe the notion that good fences make good neighbors. And so absolutely, I think biosecurity is critical in keeping those, because of course they will be attracted for breeding, but they will also be attracted to feed. And so good quality fences to keep those with any domestic animals in and any wild ones out is absolutely critical for sure.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Does anyone else have anything to add?
I might jump in and you're going to jump in here too if you want, but from an Alberta pork industry perspective, it's a very challenging question because we wear two hats. You know, in one breath, we want to engage and work with producers that are adopting new trends to reach new markets. And you know, I'm supportive of any producer that can bring a pig to market and generate a good business and livelihood off of that. But Ryan is also very right that, you know, education, and biosecurity. I think the containment standards for wild boar are perhaps a bit tough for an outdoor producer to embrace. But that being said, the more we can educate them about the risks and the concerns and have just a really good containment plan, fence plan, and report any if they see, I think would be very key.
Yeah, if I can answer a little bit to that as well, I do agree with those comments, but I think in addition, in our education, we should put in there that producers are liable for any damage that released animals cause. That's what I was trying to push the government on in the late 80s. And I think that would have helped. And if your animals, whether it's domestic or wild, if they escape and cause damage, and nowadays we can follow up with DNA evidence, I think that would be an education tool to teach those that are farming that a good fence is maybe the cheapest solution.
And I might just also add too that we've talked a lot about this notion of double fencing, because a single fence, you can still have nose-to-nose contact through a fence and spread disease. And so while I fully appreciate that there's a major cost to a fence, never mind the notion of a double fence with some sort of a gap, but certainly from a biosecurity perspective in general, I am a strong advocate of considering double fencing, especially if there is a much more so if there is some sort of disease outbreak or concern.
Awesome.
Megan, I think what we can also initiate is the idea of the fence is not only to keep the pigs from escaping, but like one of the pictures that was presented, to stop the pigs from outside of the fence coming into your herd. So it's a biosecurity measure. And I think if we can actually spin it for the producers and saying, we're going to try to protect your herd from the feral ones, then it's an easier sell.
Absolutely. Awesome. Okay, great answers. Thank you, everyone. So the next question comes from Greg Harris. who's going to be at Aggie Days along with AISC in this coming week. It's very exciting in Cremona, everybody. We'll see you there. So Greg asks, and I believe this is for Don, does your county allow wild boar hunting farms? And do you have any adjoining municipalities that do? And have you had issues with that affecting the number of wild boar at large? So Don, I'll let you take the first stab.
Okay, sure. So yes, our current producer does have a wild boar hunting location, and he does, when he releases animals onto the site, and he makes sure that they are either all hunted or whatever is not hunted is captured and brought back to the farm. So I can't say at this point, I believe that he is not contributing to the extra numbers. I can't say in the past if he has or not. So at this point, I would say likely not, because that's what he has told us he is doing, and I have to take his word for that. So, yeah.
And if we talk about biosecurity and containment, keep in mind that the sort of hunting operations are very different in size than almost any of the domestic farm raising wild boar type animals. For meat would be probably a 50th the size or something like that, much, much smaller. And so containment challenges go up as operations get bigger. And so I think that, from my view, is one of the biggest concerns that I hear about the farming operations, is that being able to set up and maintain a sufficient fence to keep pigs in is a real challenge. And sort of, we hear a lot of jokes in Saskatchewan about why pay when you can go around the outside of these farms, because there's been so many escapees that the hunting is as good outside of the fence as inside.
If I could jump in, even in a state with 3 million feral pigs, we have a lot of put and take shooting preserves. They buy pigs from other places. They turn them into smaller places where they can virtually guarantee someone would kill one. And that not only creates a small focal area where pigs can also escape from, but it creates a supply demand kind of a question. Somebody is supplying the pigs to that operation, and they're getting an economic incentive. Again, whether we're talking about bounty, whether we're talking about a meat market, whether we're talking about a shooting preserve, that supply demand equation never limits the pig numbers. It encourages people to continue to crop pigs. And so you got to think of it from the other side. Even if he's not a breeder, as Dawn is, her operation is a breeder that's putting them out and then taking them back. So even in a put and take, even if you were only releasing boars, you're creating a demand that then ends up with somebody supplying that.
Absolutely. Any other comments on that question? Okay, we'll move right along. So we've got a couple that came in here. So so Justin asks, he says, so if you get rid of hunting wild pig, would you consider giving out trapping licenses of some sort for other people so they can help deal with the wild hogs? So Charlotte, maybe, would you like to?
Yeah, I'll just say, because we're working in partnership with the government of Alberta, and I'd say that we've had those discussions. The biggest challenge too is it's expensive to set up whole sounder eradication and to get into the various tools that are required. So you have to make sure it makes sense. So I won't say no, but I also won't say yes. I would say those are some of the things that are being discussed and actively looked at right now. But I don't have a clear yes, no for that one at this point.
I think if I can add to that, I think it's on the surface, it's a great idea, but trapping wild boars isn't really simple. And the so-called experts aren't necessarily experts at trapping wild boars. So I think if you were to do that, you'd have to have people, I don't know, pass a standards test of their ability to do this properly, or pass a course. That's what I would see as being workable.
And Jürgen, I would completely agree. You almost need a mentorship style program because we are
Yeah.
actively learning every day in the field. So
Again, I don't want to focus just on Texas, but if our experience can help, I want to offer it. We have some intensive focus areas within the state. Our farm bill has funded a pilot project, and so we're doing a more direct control than we have ever been able to afford. We've also tried to incorporate the landowners into that solution. We bought the smart traps. We will loan the smart traps. We'll deliver the smart trap, help them set it up, put the corn out, give them 100 pounds of corn when we drive off so that they can bait the trap. And it has been effective. People who are interested have borrowed the traps. They have set the traps. Usually they get a little annoyed when the 18th raccoon of the night walks in front of the camera and they shut the camera off. But to give you an idea of the success, for about the same amount of money, our direct control program has killed over 30,000 pigs in these areas, and the trap loan program has killed about 3,000 pigs in these areas. And so dollar for dollar, a coordinated control effort has been more effective. In Texas, anybody who kills a pig is a friend of mine, but it is not the best use of your resources.
We have a really good case study here in Saskatchewan that the Moose Mountain eradication team, all cattle producers, they were just fed up with nobody doing anything, and they went on their own. They use firearms, but they also have a standard protocol, which they were our experts and could do a lot of info on everything they learned from starting out on their own to effectively having to relearn everything they thought they knew. But basically, they had a lot of success in removing entire sounders, and that requires a lot of training. You know, I bought them a set of VHF radios, and so they could talk to each other, and so there is a lot of work needed, but you get the right committed folks. But I think the problem we run into is there's a lot of people who want to just dabble in it. They want one for the freezer. They want to have the joy of the hunt. And so we have thousands of people on the prairies that just want to go out and blast away at them and hunt. And I think we probably want to be really, really clear how fundamentally different some, 2 or 3 guys going out for fun versus what an actual eradication or control team looks like. It has a different mentality, a different focus. And I think that one of the things that the Moose Mountain group insisted early on is that nobody gets to keep a pig. There is no benefit. Nobody eats them. These animals are buried and gone because they don't want to see a benefit or people get a flavor for it and say, wow, this is a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. So kind of along those lines, there's another question here. So as anonymous attendee is asking, if I see a wild pig or two on my property, can I shoot them or should I just report the sighting?
Oh, I don't know, Dawn, if you want to tackle that, but I think I would go out and say that and that's where it's a little bit difficult with our regulation, because the landowner does have a requirement to try to control that pest. Our preference would be that the control measure they use would be to report it to the government. And I think I feel pretty comfortable saying we would work with them and recognize their efforts for doing that. But Dawn, you live that situation every day, so take it away.
I think the preference also would be to report it, but if in that case there's only 1 or 2, and if they get them both, then you've removed them off the landscape. But I do believe that the preference would still be to report it in case there are others in the area.
I would say in general, if you saw 2, there's probably more than double that generally. I think that the likelihood of seeing all of them under almost any scenario is very, very rare. So if you think you saw 2, then I would, without any trail cameras or any other information, I would say you more than likely, probably those are minimum estimates. At least 9 times out of 10, they're probably underestimates. So, and we hear this, I've heard this 10,000 times in the last 12 years. It said, we had pigs, me and my buddies went out and shot them, haven't seen any for 5 years. We eradicated them. I would say in almost all cases that is not true, that you've either moved them over to the neighbors, or what we see an awful lot of is that people shoot them up and they kill 3 or 4 and high fives and great, that's fantastic, this is great social media, except that you've only killed a small portion of them and become much more nocturnal, and they hit heavy, ugly cover. And this was a point of much discussion. You know, we have GPS callers out, go to a meeting like this in person, and people say, well, yeah, me and my buddies, we eradicate. I said, well, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you've got 4 GPS collared animals sleeping in your back 40 right now. And so I would say that that in most cases, I would question that. If you said you saw 2, I would say, well, maybe. So that would be, I would certainly not advocate for, I'm not a huge fan of anything do-it-yourself, DIY with pigs. And I sort of make the analogy compared to you know, a forest fire or a house fire, that, you know, it takes off so quickly, it's so hard to manage that in almost all cases you're much better off to leave it to the experts. Otherwise you just perpetrate the problem, spread them around, and then they say, oh, whoops, we shot 2, we thought we didn't, but guess what, there's still 6 around, and those 6 are now way harder to find. And that's one of the biggest challenges of, well, there are a number of challenges with hunting. One of them is after they get shot at even once, they become 10 times harder to find. That's certainly been one of them, absolutely. But also that, you know, that breaks them up and spreads them around, and lots of other reasons why trying to do it yourself is almost going to end up in disaster.
What we've seen frequently is that someone is always trying to trap and bait them. If we've got a trapping program going on, and if somebody on an adjacent property shoots at them, it makes the trapping effort almost impossible. It changes their behavior. It moves them around. So if you're in a coordinated trapping program, don't shoot them. Please report them. That supports them staying in a pattern and going to that trap site. As soon as somebody shoots at them once, they're off their pattern. So.
And we've seen that so-called Yahoo effect here in Canada as well, where it takes one Yahoo to screw everything up. And I know we were our very first year of capturing and collaring in Saskatchewan, we flew fixed wing a lot to find pigs, and we found a bunch, and we had the helicopter ready to go the next morning. But we flew there first thing in the morning, and Yahoos had seen us flying in the plane and went to those areas and ripped through with snow machines and shot them all up. And there was no pigs to be found where we'd found them, you know, less than 24 hours early. So we have actually spent a lot of time just flying around empty chunks of bush in a little plane, trying to throw them off the scent and say, tell the pilot, hey, there's an empty place with no pigs. And he said, okay, well, it's your dime. You can do whatever you want, but we just do circles. And then, so yeah, there's definitely a Yahoo issue with this, that unfortunately one or a small group of individuals can really mess up control efforts and certainly research programs.
Okay. So the next question, maybe Charlotte, you might be able to answer this one. So they're wondering if they heard correctly at some point during the presentation that AFSC in Alberta will cover damages caused by wild pigs to producers and non-pig producers. And if so, what information or data would the producer with the damage need to provide to AFSC?
Yeah, no, that is very true. And it's the recent announcement that just came out this fall. So it's very exciting. I haven't seen a producer actually apply through it yet and exactly what information they are going to require. But the best thing for that producer to do is, if they suspect there's crop damage from wild boar, is to go through the exact same process they would do if they thought it was bear, but to declare it as wild boar, reach out to their AFSC crop insurance contact and start their claim that way. In terms of what specifically they'll have to do, they're going to have to allow access to our provincial contractors to their land to support whole sounder eradication efforts. So that's the biggest requirement for them. The rest of it is really just paperwork. So I haven't seen any come through yet. I'm excited to see what that program turns up for us.
Awesome. Does anyone have anything to add to that? That's probably a black and white question. Okay, fantastic. So the next question, so this was from Brian Walton. So I'm going to go to your original question that Mike and Ryan addressed here, but because I think this is useful for everyone to hear. So he said he joined the webinar a little bit late, but he did hear Dr. Brooke talk about wild pigs as vector for African swine fever. So we're also worried about wild pigs as vectors for foot and mouth disease, which we're currently free of in North America, but is of a concern to the cattle industry in Canada. So we just want us to hear, any comments from the speakers on that, I guess that risk to expanded risk. Yeah, and I know that there's Mike and Brian addressed that a little bit, but Charlotte, maybe you want to
yeah, I can just jump in and say, Brian, you're absolutely right. There is a concern there from foot and mouth as well. The challenge with pigs and foot and mouth is they may not get incredibly sick, but they do amplify that disease like no tomorrow. So it's a very significant risk from foot and mouth. From a pork industry perspective, we are more focused right now on ASF because of how active it is with our key trading partners, as well as with it popping up in the Dominican Republic. That's very, very close to home. And I think Ryan mentioned that in the chat as well. So that is very concerning, especially once you look at the fact that now people are moving again. And as people move, it's going to be people that'll transmit this disease. So, but Brian, you were not wrong. And I suspect that's one of the major reasons why, Alberta Beef is on board with the Squeal on Pigs campaign, is because of the concern over foot and mouth, which is also a concern for the Alberta pork industry as well. We're just triaging our issues at this moment.
The good news is that the control efforts are largely the same, trying to get the pig population down, biosecurity on farms to keep livestock away, good fencing. You wouldn't, generally speaking, a control program for ASF wouldn't look all that different from a control program for foot and mouth. So, those are similar, although of course the issue is the multi-species angle. But yeah, we had an outbreak, of course, in Saskatchewan, and it was actually a friend of mine whose only office is a few doors down from me. His family sent over some sausage from the old country, and it was bad by the time they got it, so they threw it in to the pigs, and African swine fever, or pardon me, foot and mouth outbreak in Saskatchewan that ended up with a lot of livestock being killed. So it literally can be just one simple thing like that. So it is unfortunate, but again, yeah, the risks are not all that different. And I would argue the control efforts are virtually identical.
Okay. Thanks for that. So the next question, I'm going to jump to this one because I think we can answer it quickly. So this is for Don. So they asked, did they see or understand Don's report correctly? Were more pig ears collected yearly or in a short time by bounty hunters or with the trapping of the sounder method? So Don, can you remind us of the numbers for the whole sounder versus the ear bounty and the timelines involved?
Absolutely. So our the bounty program, the initial bounty program, we were involved for 9 years, and that was 267 animals, ear pairs turned in, which would be about 30 animals per year. And with the whole sounder trapping, we've been involved in that program since 2018. So I would say 3 full years, because it's partial years in there. But in the 3 years, we've had 210 animals removed. So 70 animals per year, approximately. So on average. So yes, our whole sounder math kind of says that we are a little more effective with the whole sounder. Well, quite a bit more effective, actually. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Don, for that. So the next question is, as the issue is wild pig, not wild boar, are there any best management practices that can be recommended to individuals that are pasture raising pigs?
I did think we kind of touched on that one already. I mean, it's biosecurity and education, and more biosecurity and more education. So I think we covered that one off pretty well.
Perfect. So Nicole asks, what has the research been in Alberta for presence, absence, and population density, particularly north of Edmonton with a lower human population density, which would reduce the chance of positive sightings?
Well, really up until just recently, Ryan has been the one leading all of the population information, so he should comment on that. For Alberta specific data, we have what Ryan's put together. And hopefully we're going to start on some new research here out of the UFC. But Ryan, do you want to?
Yeah, so I spoke quite a bit about sort of the nuts and bolts details of how we've been collecting occurrences and relying on, well, and I don't know if I mentioned them all, but we use any media reports, anything where we can confirm is added to our database, and we've been doing that since 2010. So we have quite good detailed information on occurrences of pigs. We would need more systematic monitoring, and I think that's where we're heading. To talk about densities. We can talk about density of occurrences, and I can map those all day long. And we have, a really detailed database of 60,000 occurrences in Canada, of which quite a number of those, what did I say, 8% of everything is in Alberta. So we have a reasonably good handle on the overall distribution, and certainly understand where the hot spots are in terms of where you're seeing more points, you're seeing higher density of occurrences. Does that correlate with density? Almost absolutely, certainly. But in terms of actual calculations of pig density, we need much more refined approach, which would almost certainly involve networks of trail cameras as being really the only way to really dig deep into that.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. So there's one more question in the Q&A, and we're getting close to our 8:40 cutoff time here. So they're asking, is there an opportunity for volunteer efforts or subsidization of traps or cameras for farms, agricultural lands to reduce sounders?
Not at this point in time. I mean, we're still grappling with a lot of the issues. We're still grappling with, can we engage other approved contractors, the mentorship. Mike raised some absolutely brilliant points there on the effectiveness of that. So at this point in time, I'm going to say no. I can never predict the future. My crystal ball is broken, so I don't know what will come.
I will say across the prairies, generally, I think anybody running trail cameras and sharing any, so if you run them specifically for white-tailed deer or elk or whatever your reason is for having trail cams out, if you see pigs show up on that, then start calling Squeal on Pigs ASAP. I have subsidized trail cameras for people in the past in my various areas. I don't know that there's any formal policies around that, but certainly in the past, I've definitely given out a lot of trail cameras and supported people doing it. Our database, I think we probably have somewhere north of 7,000 photos of wild pigs in our database. So, and a lot of that comes from the public sharing them. So that's great. Whether we could subsidize trail cams, I think it's something we should be looking at. I mean, having those eyes in the landscape is just a fundamental cornerstone of finding them and then reporting. So I think that's important. In terms of control, that's out of my bailiwick, but certainly as the folks that have been doing all the mapping and monitoring for Canada for a long time, certainly appreciate the notion of collecting and sharing sightings, spreading the word about why we need to. I think that's probably the other piece of Squeal on Pigs. We need more emphasizing the why part and explaining, okay, it's not just some pigs, oh, look at those cute animals, or it's not, hey, we see in the media, and sort of one of the unspoken rules that we try and have around media stories is don't read the comments. But if you do read the comments, in fact, there's lots and lots of people that say, well, you idiots, you just need to open it to hunting, or ooh, bacon, ooh, it's all talk about hunting. But we do need to do more and more, I think, of getting that word out that, hunting is not the answer and will not be the answer.
Awesome. That's a really excellent note to close on, I think, too, is maybe a call to action for everyone to squeal on pigs, right? Like that's something everyone can do. If you see something, say something, learn the signs of pigs, because you're more likely to come across damage signs than maybe the animals themselves. So that's a big call to action that I think everyone can do. So it's 8:41. Does anyone have any last minute comments, words of advice? We'll sign off here quickly, but I'll open it up one last time to our expert speakers here this evening. Last minute comments.
You said it beautifully, Megan. Squeal on pigs, please,
Yeah.
please.
That's right.
I would maybe just also close with the word urgency.
Yeah.
That we are well advanced on this. This is not we're not currently at the first face-off. We're towards the end of the third period here. And so I think I really, really want to emphasize the absolute critical nature of urgency, that we can't just sort of wait 4, 5, 6 years until we get a handle on this. I've said this many times, but we'll repeat it, that the window for eradication on the Canadian prairies is closing pretty rapidly. And so we may have to just live with them if we don't get in front of this sooner than later.
And we still can. I mean, we have precedents with rats. We, as Albertans, came together in 1940s and we eliminated rats. I mean, there's only a few places in the world that have no rats, and we're one of them. So I think if we come together, we can eradicate wild boar in Alberta.
Absolutely.
Good luck. I know what happens when you don't.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. Well, thank you so much. It's now getting close to 10 o'clock in Texas, so we're keeping Mike up late. I thank you. This was a long session, and we wanted to get all of our speakers to be able to share their experiences and their research and information on this really important topic. We know there's just an absolute ton of interest. We'll be posting this to the abinvasives.ca website in the next few days. There's also a bunch of materials that were mentioned and links to Ryan's lab and that sort of thing. We'll post all those links and try to compile all the information for a one-stop shop for everyone. A huge thank you to our speakers for being here tonight. Thank you so much. And that's all, folks. Thanks so much for being here. Have a wonderful evening. We'll be in touch. All right. And squeal on pigs.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, folks. Good night. We're going to log off.
All right.